Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Bella sighed, idly twiddling her thumbs as she flopped on the living room couch. She looked blankly at the dark screen of the television affixed to the wall across from her, its flat surface currently dark. It had been on earlier, but when she realized that she was only looking at it, but not really paying attention, she vaguely remembered a talk show of some sort. She had shut it off. Turning her head slightly towards the sliding doors that lead out to the veranda, she could just make out Jasper's side profile, his hand on his chin. The corner of his mouth she could see pulled down in a frown. Though she couldn't see the other two, she knew him and the boys were currently expanding on the battle strategy they had been discussing for the last 2 days now. Aside from Nan, who had stubbornly insisted on listening to every dirty detail, the girls had willingly chosen to be left out this time. Charlotte had wandered off to somewhere in the house over an hour ago, while Rose, for a time, had watched television with her. Unfortunately, Rose had one advantage, or perhaps disadvantage in this case, that Bella did not. Though she had chosen not to be a part of the conversation taking place on the veranda, she could just as easily hear it, even through the thick glass. As it progressed, Bella had watched Rose get tenser and tenser until eventually she jerked to her feet. "I'm sorry, Bells," she whispered tersely. "I don't think I can listen too much more of this right now." Bella's face crumpled with misery, knowing that the conversation Rose was unwillingly hearing was entirely her fault. "I'm not mad at you, Bella," Rose assured her, even though her words were clipped and distracted as she fumbled to put on her jacket. "And don't think for a second that I blame any of this on you. I need some time to think." She began making her way towards the door, throwing, "If the guys ask, tell them I went to the store," over her shoulder. Bella had endured the silence for a half an hour after she left, growing more miserable with each passing minute. She faked a smile and gave a half-hearted shrug when Jasper shot her a concerned look through the glass, motioning with her hand for him to stay where he was and continue his conversation. "I'm fine," she mouthed, and though he didn't look convinced, if she was honest, she wasn't entirely convinced she didn't want him to run to her and scoop her up for a cuddle either. He turned his face away. "Where is Puppy Kisses when you need him?" she thought. Realizing the last time she'd seen Jet had been almost 2 hours ago, glad for the sudden distraction, she pushed herself off the couch and decided to go track down the wayward pup. The last time she'd been left to her own devices, the cords to Emmett's PlayStation had ended up chewed beyond repair. "Jet," she called, peeking her head quickly into the kitchen. Seeing that she wasn't occupied with either of the bowls set out on the floor, Bella turned and tramped her way up the stairs. Any of the doors along the hallway that opened up into a bedroom were solidly shut, as each couple had learned the hard way what happened when a puppy with a penchant for chewing things was allowed to roam freely within. The door to the library study at the end of the hall was partially cracked, and Bella felt a moment of panic for all the valuable books that were housed within. Swiftly making a beeline towards the door, she breathed a sigh of relief when she saw that the state of the room was as pristine as ever, and the pup, which had grown significantly in the last month and a half, was lying on Charlotte, snoozing quite contentedly. Looking up from her book, Charlotte took note of where Bella's gaze was focused and glanced down at the puppy stretched out on her stomach. "I'm hoarding her attention, aren't I?" "Nah, she's got more than enough love to go around. I was just worried she was in here chewing on one of James's first editions." Charlotte pointed to the topmost shelf. "There's a reason he keeps them up there," she chuckled. Bella shot her a weak grin and twitched uncomfortably in the doorway, feeling a sudden sense of déjà vu as Charlotte sat up, shifted Jet until she was lying across her legs, and patted the now vacated spot on the couch beside her. "You okay?" Charlotte asked softly as Bella sank into the cushion beside her, tucking one foot underneath her as she sat. Bella shrugged. "I'm okay." Charlotte tilted her head. "She meant it, you know. Rosie, she's not mad at you." "You feel people's emotions too?" Bella joked weakly. Charlotte's lips tilted in a half-smile. "No, that's strictly Jasper's area. She's just a little overwhelmed. To me, Jas and Peter, this is simply business as usual," she said matter-of-factly. "And knowing Emmett, he probably approaches this like it's some sort of game, but Rose realizes how serious this all is." "I've messed up their lives so bad," Bella thought miserably. "No, you didn't." Bella looked up, startled. "Did I say that out loud?" "No. But it's written all over your face." "It's hard not to think that," Bella admitted, wringing her hands nervously. "I imagine anyone in your position would," she said, patting her shoulder gently. You're so focused on this single event at the moment, you can't see all the good that you've brought into their life. Single event? Bella sputtered, clamping down a sudden rush of anger. That's a bit of an understatement, don't you think? Honestly, I don't know if I can answer that without sounding cocky or unintentionally condescending. You know of Jasper's past, right? And by extension, mine and Peter's. She gave Bella a moment to nod. We are very good at what we do, Bella. Very good, she said plainly. No trace of boasting in her voice. At one point or another, the three of us have seen and done things that make what's happening look like child's play in comparison. And now you're being forced to relive those things because of me. Forced? She blinked. Who's being forced? Peter and I practically invited ourselves here. Not, she clarified, holding up a hand to cut off Bella's protest, because we felt like we had to, but because we wanted to. She looked at Bella knowingly, and I imagine Jasper has told you the exact same thing as well. Once or twice, Bella admitted sheepishly, and though Rose is a little overwhelmed at the moment, I know her and Emmett feel the same. She reached towards Bella's lap and tentatively curled her fingers around her clasped hands. Family, she said, her eyes shining brightly. Real family means everything to us. Everything, she whispered forcefully. And we would do anything for them. Anything for you. She squeezed her hand and shot her a soft smile when Bella squeezed back. But you just met me, Bella whispered, a tear trailing down her cheek at the honesty in Charlotte's words. Charlotte beamed. It's a vampire thing, she teased. Bella chuckled wetly and wiped at her eyes. You and Peter are... She fumbled for a word that would adequately describe how amazing they turned out to be. Charlotte shrugged. Awesome, I know. Big-headed, Bella muttered good-naturedly. That too, Charlotte chuckled. Now that the heavy stuff was out of the way, Bella decided to shift the conversation to something a little lighter. I was wondering if I could ask you something. Sure. A slow smile stretched her lips. As long as you promise not to run off with my mate. Bella chuckled. Heard that, did you? One of the downsides of being surrounded by a bunch of vampires, I'm afraid. Oh, trust me, I've had to learn that lesson the hard way, more times than I care to admit. So, question, Charlotte prodded. By any chance would it be about my hair? Your hair? Bella's eyes immediately zoomed in on the silvery white strand. When Bella had met Charlotte for the first time the other day, she had wrongly assumed that the silver she saw woven through her braid had been a ribbon. It wasn't until she had left her hair loose yesterday that she realized that the inch-wide bolt of silver was actually its color. It didn't begin at the root. Instead, it was as if the lock of hair had been dipped halfway down. Bella had been itching with curiosity when she'd noticed it, but figured pointing out a woman's gray hair was like asking her age. No, not exactly. I was curious about it, but didn't think it was right to ask. After living with Peter as long as I have, you learn quickly that no subject is off limits, no matter how taboo you might think it is. She fiddled with the strand, twirling it around her pale fingers. Humans assume I've done it for aesthetic reasons, she rolled her eyes, because apparently silver streaks are all the rage now. And I've run into a fanboy or two who thought I did it to emulate that rogue character, poorly I might add, she mocked in a snobby, nasally voice. The story behind it is a bit unpleasant. Has Jasper or the others told you anything about the turning process? Bella nodded uneasily. Between Jasper, Rose, and Emmett, she'd learned enough to realize it was pretty intense. She believed the word agonizing had been thrown around a time or two. Turnings can be a bit, well, traumatic to the body. And you know what they say about stress, right? She flicked the piece of hair. It's actually a pretty rare occurrence. Only happens to maybe a handful of vampires. She sighed. Which just proves how lucky I am, I guess, on the upside. I never get carded. Remembering Charlotte's earlier statement of no question being taboo, she asked, How old were you when you were turned? Charlotte tapped her chin. 19 or 20. Give or take a year or so? I'd wager. Just like Rose, my records were a little hard to track down. I don't have many memories, but from the few I do have, I strongly suspect I was a, she cleared her throat, working girl from a very early age. Bella blinked, unsure of how exactly to react to that. I'm sorry? Charlotte shrugged unashamedly. Don't be. The others, especially Peter, don't like to think about it, but I accepted that part of my past a long time ago. You have to, when you live as long as we do, or it will eat away at you. She paused. Like it almost did, Jasper, she whispered. Bella looked down at her hands. To go from that life and then being immediately forced into another that was just as unforgiving. She couldn't even imagine being as strong as this woman who, despite the seriousness of her words, looked genuinely unaffected by the harsh truth of them. And, like Charlotte had implied, it didn't only apply to her but her other vampires as well. They had all suffered so much in their lives and were still able to smile, laugh, joke, and love regardless of it all. Suddenly, the hopeful part of her knew that they would make it through all this. Charlotte, seeming to sense the direction her thoughts had taken her, shot her a small smile. "So, what exactly was your question?" Bella frowned. "Well, this might be a little out of left field, especially now, but there's this doll." Charlotte groaned, slamming her eyes shut, and thumped her head heavily on the seat behind her. The movement disturbed Jet, who opened her mouth in a wide yawn before leaping off Charlotte's lap and trotting out the door in search for food. "Don't tell me. Porcelain, red hair, green eyes." Bella nodded excitedly. "Was Nan right?" "Peter swears up and down that the person who crafted that must have run across me at some point and used me as their own personal muse, and the visage is uncanny, but there's no proof backing it up." She peeked at her with one eye. "Do you know how many fanatic doll collectors I've come across in the last 50 years who marvel over the same thing? Enough to make you want to search down every last one of them and smash them all," she grumbled. "Well, I guess subconsciously I did you a favor then." "How's that?" "Man in a doll like that. She's actually the one who wanted me to ask, and..." "Well," she smiled sheepishly, "I kinda accidentally smashed it." Charlotte laughed and held her hand out for a fist bump. Bella reciprocated with a giggle before moaning, "I'm a terrible granddaughter," and slumped her head into her hands. "What's so funny?" The sudden addition of Nain's voice startled her slightly, and Bella peeked at her through her fingers. "Nothing. You were half right about the doll, though." Nan grinned. "She knows it?" "She said Peter thinks it was based on her, but she's not so sure." "Speaking of Peter, I'm guessing the boys are done strategizing." Nan nodded. "They're on their way up." Peter suddenly burst through the door. "As we speak," she finished dryly. Jasper trailed in after him, taking in the sight of Bella still cradling her head in her hands and looking at Nan, though through his eyes it probably looked like she was staring at the wall, and asked, "Everything all right?" "Fine," Bella replied, dropping her hands. "Yep," Charlotte agreed. "Just playing the getting-to-know-you game." Peter looked between the two of them suspiciously. "Getting to know what exactly?" "Don't worry, Peter," Bella lied. "My lips are sealed about your cross-dressing fetish." Her eyes widened and her mouth formed an O shape in a show of fake contrition. "Oops. That was only one time," Peter whined. Bella froze before guffawing loudly. "I wasn't being serious. You really..." She started laughing hysterically, clutching at her stomach and pounding her foot. Peter looked like a deer in headlights, and she watched through blurry eyes as he shot an accusing look at Charlotte, like this was somehow her fault. "Busted," Bella cried, pointing a finger at Peter as the others joined in on her laughter. "God, I needed that," Bella muttered, swiping the tears of laughter from her cheeks. After all the seriousness of the last few days, hell, the last month it felt so good to just let go for once. She sobered when she saw that Jasper's face had settled back into a look of determination. He shot Bella an apologetic look, and when he brushed gently against their bond, she could tell he was genuinely upset that he had to disrupt her amusement. "We need to start preparing." Bella straightened in her seat. Preparing what exactly? Her mind, still ringing with traces of humor, suddenly imagined them stringing up traps, a la Home Alone, throughout the house and surrounding forest. "Ourselves," Jasper ordered grimly. Bella stood off to the side, wincing as Emmett was once again knocked to the dirt. He may have brute strength on his side, but he was no match for Jasper's speed and agility. "Why are they doing this again?" she asked Charlotte, who stood calmly by her side, arms looped casually. On the other side of the small clearing, Rose, who had returned moments before Jasper ordered them all out into the woods and shot Bella, "You will talk later," look, studied the squabbling males with laser-like focus, patiently waiting for her turn. "Me, Peter, and Jasper all have experience with newborns." Charlotte paused and nodded in approval when Emmett managed to outmaneuver Peter's sudden attack and slammed him violently into the pine-covered forest floor. "Rose and Emmett don't." "Is it that different from fighting normal vampires?" "Quite a bit, actually. Even though vampires can plan and strategize, which you'd think would make them more of a threat, newborns are irrational and in a constant state of bloodlust that makes their actions frenzied and unpredictable. There's neither rhyme nor reason to their attacks, and they are often very messy and uncoordinated." "Wouldn't that make them easier to fight?" Bella watched, impressed as Rose executed a perfect twist away from Jasper's swinging hands and landed in a pose straight out of an action movie, looking up at him with a taunting smirk. "Theatrical much," Peter called out. She didn't get a chance to retort, immediately having to go on the defense when Jasper attacked again and Peter rushed her from the side. "See the surprise on her face?" Charlotte pointed out. Indeed, her golden gaze was wide with shock and panic as she quickly realized that, because of the position she'd put herself in, it would be impossible to evade both of their attacks. She managed to dodge Peter's, but was sent flying by Jasper's solid kick to her abdomen. Emmett twitched off to the side, his body warring with the instinct to protect his mate and obey Jasper's earlier command to not interfere unless prompted. "Vampires are pretty much bred for battle," Charlotte continued, tearing Bella's attention away from the action. "That doesn't necessarily mean you'll be a skilled fighter after you're turned. Granted, some are naturals like Peter and Jasper, but most have to be honed. Every vampire brain is hardwired to fight. The only problem is that finesse, for lack of a better word, comes with age. Newborns don't have the control necessary for that. So, while we can plan our own actions and sometimes even calculate the reactions of our more mature opponents, it's not that easy with the newly turned. Their minds are all over the place. And the attack with the finesse of a feeding frenzy? Look at Peter, for example. She didn't really have to ask. Bella was already staring as Peter tackled Emmett to the ground and snapped his teeth in his face as Emmett squirmed beneath him. His face was scrunched up in disgust as silvery rivulets of venom dripped from Peter's mouth and splashed on him. "Was that really necessary?" he exclaimed when he finally managed to push Peter off. "Gotta prepare you for the real thing," Peter replied, wiping his sleeved arm across his mouth. "And that's how they fight," Charlotte said, with a sharp nod. "Rose and Emmett are getting the mild version, but they're all snapping teeth and claws. They're not interested in plans, they just want to rip your head off." Bella frowned uneasily. "You make them sound like animals." Charlotte shrugged, the same lack of shame in her action as there'd been in revealing her backstory. "I suppose we are in many ways, especially in the beginning. As long as we have someone there to teach us and control us, we won't get lost in it. It's not always that bad, some even have a surprising amount of control, but we're preparing them for the worst-case scenario. That woman that changed all those people isn't even attempting to rein them in. Bloodlust, fear, and confusion makes for very dangerous vampires. They're stronger too." Bella was startled by Peter's sudden appearance beside her. "Aren't you guys pretty strong yourselves?" Bella pointed out. "Of course we are, no question, but they have the added benefit of having their human blood still running through their veins. It takes roughly 6 months for it to be completely replaced by venom, depending on how frequently they feed and what they feed on." "Human blood as opposed to animal," Charlotte offered. Peter nodded. "Human speeds up the process." Bella didn't need to ask why. She knew it was technically their natural food source, and once again felt a burst of admiration for her vampire's resiliency. She only hoped she'd be just as strong-willed, which was swiftly followed by concern. "Does it make you weaker? Animal blood?" Charlotte clarified. "Hey, Major," Peter called out. Jasper, who had been lecturing Emmett about something, was in mid-turn when Peter ran at him full speed. Within seconds, Peter was laid flat out, Jasper's hands around his throat as he pinned him to the ground with his knee. Peter shot Bella a gleeful smile. "That answer your question?" Jasper eased himself off Peter and offered a hand. "And what exactly was the question?" "What your favorite sexual position is," Peter shot back, dusting off his clothes as he stood. The stern, battle-weary look on Jasper's face, the same one he'd been wearing for most of the day, gave way to a playful wink in Bella's direction. "Well, I'm sure Belle could have answered that." Bella fluttered her eyelashes. Reverse cowgirl, wasn't it? Peter's face melted into bliss. "Oh, the visual," he moaned, before he was promptly face down in the dirt, thanks to Jasper's powerful smack to the back of his head. "Definitely not weak," Peter groaned, rolling around on his back. "Blood's blood," Charlotte agreed. Jasper crossed his arms across his chest. "Is this the human versus animal debate again? Let's put it this way," Peter said, climbing to his feet. "Human blood over animal is kind of like playing Mario Kart." "Mario Kart?" Bella repeated amusedly. "Yeah, it's like hitting the star power. For a brief moment, I might be able to take Jasper and beat him. But it'll wear out. The venom absorbs it too quickly, especially in the heat of battle. It burns it like yours does. Energy." "Wouldn't that mean it burns through animal blood quicker?" she asked thoughtfully. Jasper nodded. It does, yes. That's why we feed every few days or so. But it still does the same thing. Like Char said, blood's blood. Tomato, 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 too, Peter said, rocking lightly on his feet. Huh? I thought there'd be more of a difference. Peter shrugged. Think of it like gas, regular or supreme. Your car's gonna run either way. She turned to Charlotte. Is he always like this? Full of kitschy analogies, you mean? She grinned. Yeah, pretty much. He can be very Mr. Magsy sometimes. Peter waved his hands in the air. Wax on, wax off. Jasper rolled his eyes. Now that that's settled, can we please get back to business? They trained for another 2 hours before the sun began to set and a chill entered the air. I'm fine, Bella assured Jasper when he caught her rubbing at her arms in an attempt to generate heat. Her words were immediately belied by a full-body shiver. Okay, she grumbled. I am a little cold. Her stomach growled loudly. And a little hungry. But you don't have to stop. No, Jasper replied, looking around at the bedraggled group of vampires. We've been out here long enough. He walked up to Bella and took over rubbing her arms for a few long seconds. I'm probably not helping him, eh? He laughed softly and came to a stop. As he looked at his cool, pale hands. Bella sighed, stepping into his embrace. Just being around you warms me up. Flatterer, he murmured. Are you sure you want to stop? Bella asked, blinking up at him. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. I prepared them as best as I could. Anything more is overkill, he said, grinning wryly. Nice to see you still have your sense of humor, Major, Peter called out cheekily. Go to hell, Jasper shot back tiredly. He turned back to Bella and traced a hand down her face. You mind catching a ride back with Emmett, Belle? I want to talk to Peter for a few minutes. Bella nodded and tilted her face up to receive Jasper's kiss. See you at home, she said softly before pulling away and going to Emmett's side. Your pack mule is ready, he teased, bending at the knees and allowing her to climb on his back. She tossed a wave over her shoulder, and 30 seconds later, her Emmett, Rose, and Charlotte were flitting through the woods. So what's your verdict? Jasper asked as they disappeared. They're good, you know that. This isn't the first time you've given them pointers. Teaching them how to fight because you have nothing better to do is different than teaching them how to fight for their lives. How so? You know as well as I do that even during mock fighting, it's in the back of every vampire's mind how to kill their opponent. You can't exactly shut that off. Yeah, but they're ready, Major. Jesus, have some faith. You got a ballpark guess of how many we're dealing with exactly? Peter frowned lightly. I got a feeling it'll be no more than 30. 30. Not the most he'd ever fought at once, and with Peter and Charlotte at his side, it was definitely doable, but he didn't want to be too overconfident. Whenever that particular emotion got involved, it usually ended up almost getting him killed. Hell, his belief that he could easily handle 3 unarmed women had gotten him turned. He started going over the battle strategy that he'd outlined earlier that day, tweaking and perfecting it and wondering if more training was necessary. When he focused on Peter again, he noticed he was scanning their surroundings and tensed. You hear something? He demanded, assessing the area as he steeled himself for a potential attack. Peter shook his head. Making sure that they're gone, Jasper rolled his eyes and let the tenseness drain from his shoulders. It's been 15 minutes, Peter. They'd be at the house by now. What's it matter anyways? I have something for you, he said softly, grabbing the rucksack that hung haphazardly from a lower branch. Jasper had seen it on his back earlier and planned on asking it about it, but when Peter had removed a bottle of water from it and gave it to Bella, he assumed that it held snacks and such for the only human in the group. Peter removed a small cloth swaddled bundle. I had a feeling you would need it, he said, handing it over. Jasper squared his shoulders and prepared himself for what he knew without a doubt was wrapped in the cloth. He felt his skin crawl as he unraveled it and looked upon the knife he hadn't seen in a very long time. The scars it had inflicted began to throb with remembered pain, and he watched as Peter unconsciously touched the silvery scar that would have cost him his eye if he'd been human. When did you get that? He asked as he felt the heavy weight of it in his hands. A grim smirk twisted his lips as the memory of his vial maker's screams echoed in his head. Stopped on the way. Hell of a detour. Peter shrugged. I know it'll be put to good use. I never wanted a reason to touch this thing again, Jasper said thickly as he rewrapped the cloth bindings. I know now this is why I held on to it, but after this is over, we're going to find some way to destroy this. Peter frowned. You sure that's the best idea, Jay? He barked out a harsh laugh. Am I sure? he said, fingering the raised scar circling his heart that he could feel even beneath the fabric of his sweater. Exactly how many like it have you come across, Peter? There was something different about Marie's venom, something warped that allowed her to even make this. There was something unnatural about her, period. You remember the whispers around camp? Brosier, Peter murmured. I never knew if it was true, but this knife... He trailed off and glared down at it. I'm not sure if it can be replicated, but I sure as hell ain't gonna give them the template. You're right. I usually am, he replied distractedly, shoving it back in the rucksack. Do you want me to hold on to it? Peter offered. Jasper waved him off, swinging a strap over his shoulder. There's a safe in my room. I'll put it there. He paused and pensively gazed off into the distance, wondering to himself if the knife would be enough to turn the tides in their favor, and if he could bring himself to use it again considering the memories that came with it. Anything for my Belle, a dark voice snarled softly. Peter must have sensed the direction his thoughts had gone, because he sighed loudly. I might as well be the one to say it, even if you don't want to hear it, but maybe we should call them. Jasper frowned. You're right, I didn't want to hear it. Even if he had considered it briefly, he wasn't too keen on the idea. What do you think, Peter? I don't know, Jay. I'm not really getting the whole picture with this situation. My sight might not be like the Magnificent Malice's, but it's usually pretty straightforward. All I'm feeling right now are conflicting messages that I can't make heads or tails of. I'm not saying yes, but I'm not saying no either. It's your call, Major. Jasper's phone rang, and he grimaced as he checked the caller ID. No, apparently it isn't. He hit the connect button. Hello, Carlisle. Anyone ever tell you you're hell on the legs? Bella moaned, 10 minutes later, sliding from Emmett's back and rubbing the inside of her thighs. It had been difficult to wrap her legs around Emmett's wide frame, and she was concerned she was going to end up bay-legged. Well, Rosie, he started. She jerked her hand in the air, effectively cutting him off. I'm sorry I even asked, she said, hobbling into the house and heading toward the kitchen. Want me to cook you up something? Charlotte offered as Bella rifled through the fridge. Nah, Bella replied. Leftovers will be fine. Charlotte nodded and walked off, calling out Jet's name. Bella withdrew a Tupperware container of lasagne, and not even bothering to heat it, ate it directly over the sink, pausing long enough to look around and make sure that no one was around to see her stuff, her face. Shuffling tiredly up the stairs, a blissful smile drifted over her lips at the thought of a hot shower. Can I talk to you for a second? Bella paused half over the threshold of her and Jasper's bedroom and glanced back at Rose, who stood at the entryway of her own bedroom. Sure. Rose closed the door behind them as soon as she entered. I'm sorry about earlier, bailing on you like that. It's all right, Bella replied softly. Rose shook her head. No, it's not. I'm not usually one to walk away from my problems like that, and I meant what I said. I'm not angry at you. She perched herself on the edge of the bed. If anything, I'm mad at the Cullens. Bella's eyebrows raised in surprise. The Cullens? Why? If only they had stepped up on the field that day. I can't help but think we wouldn't be in this mess. Sure, none of them are exactly as skilled as Jasper in the fighting area, but 4 of them against 1 vampire, she scoffed. They could have taken her, or at least tried. She began twisting the bottom hem of her pale blue sweater. I've been asking myself for months why they didn't, and it's been leaving me a little unsettled. Bella grimaced. They didn't exactly like me, she pointed out. Your point? Rose snapped, immediately looking contrite at her tone. They knew how important you were to us, to Jasper. They should have done something instead of just standing there. She sighed heavily. But right now, that's beside the point. I shouldn't have taken my anger out on you. Bella shrugged. Maybe I deserve it. Rose curled her fists and placed them on her hips. You are not playing the blame game. But I'm allowed, she replied snottily. They're vampires, Bella. Perhaps somewhat clueless, but still strong vampires. They deserve a bit of blame for doing nothing when they could have done something. You, on the other hand, did nothing. Nothing, she repeated firmly. You're not going to blame yourself for being human. Sure, maybe we don't deserve this, but neither do you, Bella. She drew her into a gentle hug. Neither do you. A tear trickled down Bella's cheek as she clung heavily to Rose. Why don't you hate me? She gasped out. Hate you? Bella whipped around, wiping hastily at her eyes. She hadn't even heard Emmett enter the room. Why would we hate you? For all this, she clarified, gesturing her hands wildly in the air. For making Jasper happy, Emmett replied, taking a step forward. For being the little sister I've always wanted, another step. for changing our lives in ways we didn't even know we needed. Nearer still, for uniting our family, for completing it. He was now close enough to wrap her and Rose in his embrace. Now tell me, baby sis, Emmett said, what exactly should we hate? Bella collapsed into his arms, sobbing in relief. Knowing that they still loved her, would still love her. Right now, that's all that mattered. The rest could wait. When she entered the room, a shirtless Jasper was leaning his head against a simple painting he'd done, which she knew for a fact hid the door of a small safe. Are you all right? She asked tentatively as she took in the tense set of his pale, scarred shoulders. Fine, he sighed, turning and flashing her a small but weary grin. It's been a long couple of days. I'm wrong, Jasper interjected. Bella's brows furrowed. Excuse me? I caught the tail end of your conversation with Rose and Emmett, he admitted sheepishly, but it was pretty easy to guess what it was about. Bella turned her head away, slightly ashamed of her weakness, and continued self-doubt. Don't be ashamed, he chastised gently, cupping her chin in his hand and pulling her gaze back to him. I understand why you would feel that way. Doesn't change the fact that you're wrong, he teased lightly. Bella smiled. But you have to. No, I don't, he interrupted again. You don't even know what I was going to say. I know you, Belle, he replied, twirling a lock of hair around his finger. He leaned in to brush his lips against hers. Why don't we take a shower, he whispered, nibbling gently on her bottom lip. Bella smiled gratefully, glad to get away from her problems, even for an hour. And wet, naked Jasper, what girl in their right mind would turn that down? Jasper buried his face in Bella's neck, greedily inhaling their combined scents. Where's your nan? He asked offhandedly. If that's your way of asking if she saw her work out, Bella replied amusedly. The answer is no. She stopped popping into this bedroom months ago. He snorted. Not what I mean, darling. Her emotions were suddenly swirling with uneasiness. What is it? He prodded. I feel like Nan knows something. Jasper tensed. That's not the way it works, right? He reminded her gently. I know that. She knows that. But I'll catch her looking at me with... He watched as she searched for a word. I don't know, something on her face. Ever since Valentine's Day, she's so pensive all the time. And the other day, I could have swore I heard her humming. Kusira under her breath, she chuckled wryly. Jasper turned his face away and gritted his teeth. First Peter's semi-ominous warning about conflicting messages and now Nansen's. If he wasn't already dead, he'd be worrying himself into his grave at this point. Smuggling Bella out of the country was looking a little better each day. Have you asked her? He questioned calmly, falling back into soldier mode once again. She nodded. I brought it up. Yeah, but all she said is something's going to happen. The bed sheets bunched beneath her as she turned towards him. Do you want me to push? Why? Do you think she's lying? Of course not, Bella gasped. Withholding for my own good, maybe, but Nada wouldn't lie to me. And maybe she doesn't really know. All of us are guessing at this point. Even you. No, he replied, clamping down on the urge to lower his eyes. He wasn't exactly lying, but he wasn't telling the truth either. I have faith in our skills and in my family. Tara said something similar earlier, she said softly, tracing the lines on his hand. And she was right. Besides, he grimaced slightly, we have extra backup. Backup? Bella asked, her swirling fingers coming to a stop as she waited for him to clarify. I got a call from Carlisle. And? Alice had a vision. How convenient, Bella muttered bitterly. Of what exactly? The upcoming battle, and that we needed help. Although I think the need might be too strong of a word. How soon? He chuckled bitterly. She wasn't specific, of course, just a basic time frame at this point. We're looking at the end of May, possibly even early June. That late? Bella asked, surprised. Why are they taking so long? Jasper barked out a laugh. Would you prefer if they came sooner? Bella blushed. That's not exactly what I meant. It just seems weird that she's taking her time. She looked up at him questioningly. Doesn't it? He frowned. I suppose, he decided slowly. She did seem like the type who acted before she thought, but at the same time she was the only one in her group that had the sense to run away. And Alice isn't lying? Bella asked hesitantly. He shook his head. I don't think so. Peter was with me when I got the call, he said. It added up. Or should I say, his gift did. He carefully assessed the skeptical look on her face. Do you want me to tell them not to come? Why would you do that? You could use them, right? The extra help couldn't hurt, he admitted. We'll be able to cover more ground that way. And they were the ones who offered, not the other way around. She sighed heavily. I'm sure I'm just being paranoid. You're not, he assured her. Which is why you and Charter are going to stay at your house when they get here, just for a few days, he added when it looked like she was going to protest. Well, if anything, introducing Charter to Dad should be fun. Her eyes widened. I can't believe I almost forgot, she moaned shamefully. What about Dad? Bella shook her head. Never work. He hates giving out his personal information, especially for ballots. He got a little testy with the lady at the grocery store, who tried to get him to fill one out. A contemplative look stole over his face. We could try to convince him to take his vacation early. Go up to that cabin we got him for Christmas. Jasper sighed. We might have no choice but to have Chara watch the house, then. Do you really think he might get hurt? The chances of him being dragged in are slim. It seems that Victoria's motives are very clear. A mate for a mate, Bella whispered. Why is she going through all the trouble of building an army, then? Because she knows she's not simply dealing with one human, or even just one vampire. They all recognize the threat on the baseball field that day. I saw it in their eyes. I'm not necessarily proud of it, but I do have a reputation. As much as I may want to, I'm not going to ask how I can help. Even I know this is a little out of my league. I'm glad you realize that, because if you did ask, I'd have to knock you out and drag you over the state line so I'd know for sure you wouldn't do something foolish. Did you ever consider changing me? Every day, he admitted with a wry smile. But not like this. Not because either of us feel it'd be the only option. I want it to be right. So, you do want me to be a vampire? Of course I do, he insisted passionately. I'm sorry I haven't talked this over with you as much as I should have. This isn't really a subject that has a right time to talk about it. He looked down, a sheepish smile curling his lips, and even though it sounds a bit presumptuous of me, I always knew what your answer would be. Bella curled a hand around his cheek and leaned in to brush her lips against his. And you'd be right. Bella paced the kitchen floor, wringing her hands nervously. The last month had passed with relative quietness. On her end, that is. Filled with a monotonous routine of going to school, coming home, eating, doing homework, going to be, repeat. Her vampires had been as calm as vampires can be, with an impending battle on the horizon. Managing to stick to the same schedule they'd had before this mess had started, mixed in with the occasional mock fight for preparation, and finally tuning their battle strategy. Jasper tried his best to shield her from the badness that was coming their way, but as the day Alice had predicted grew nearer, he grew tenser, his mood darker, and today, when the Cullens had finally arrived, Bella didn't even bother to argue when Jasper ordered, or perhaps firmly encouraged, that she should go home and stay there for the time being. Now that the time she had feared for the last few months was almost upon them, she knew she couldn't put off her problem any longer. How am I going to get Dad to leave for a few days? I could try influencing him, Nian suggested. Subliminal messaging, perhaps. What, like whispering in his ear while he's sleeping? You've been watching too many movies. Nan? Well, then you could suggest the two of you go away for the weekend. Bella stopped pacing. I can't do that. Why? You said so yourself, that there's nothing you can do. But I'm the target. If I leave, there's nothing to say that she won't follow. And by being with Dad, I'd be putting his life in danger. Nan's lips tightened into a thin line. It bothers me how casual you use that word. Target. You're basically saying that it's better to put your life in danger. They can protect me. They can't do the same with Dad without revealing what they are. Another possible plan? Possible plan? Bella echoed incredulously. Even if they ever did decide to let Dad in on their secret, they're not going to do it in the middle of this mess. Telling him that not only are they vampires, but that they're protecting his daughter from a crazed woman and a pack of bloodthirsty newborns is a bit of a double whammy, don't you think? Perhaps we should tell him I speak to my dead grandmother next. Nan frowned. I think you need to put a little more faith in your father. And I think we need to come up with a better plan. Hey, he has handcuffs, right? And there is that thick metal pipe in the basement. You're not going to chain your father up in the basement, Chime. It was only a thought. Bella chewed her nails nervously, a habit she hadn't done since she was a kid, and glanced down at the phone in her hand. Charlotte had texted her earlier to tell her that she'd be over in an hour, and according to the wall clock, that would be in another 20 minutes. Maybe I should get Char to do this? No offense, Chime, but how's a practical stranger supposed to convince him to do anything? Do you know it took me 2 years of pestering before I could finally get that boy to get a haircut? Yeah, well, maybe she could. I don't know. Dazzle him into going... Nan chuckled wryly. Doesn't that only work in regards to attraction? Unless she plans on asking him to run away with her in the process, I doubt very much it will work. Besides, I'm sure their significant others would have something to say about that. Bella groaned loudly and collapsed into the chair, dangling her fingers down and smiling when Jet gave them a comforting lick. We're running out of time. Maybe I should have taken Jasper up on his offer to convince Dad to take his vacation early. Her mouth clamped shut when she heard the front door open, and the familiar clomping sound of Charlie's regulation boots. Bella, you home? I'm in the kitchen. Charlie walked into the kitchen, a half-smile tilting his mustache slightly, and bent down to give Jet a hearty scratch on the head. I'm glad you're here. I know this is a bit of a short notice, but I'm going away this weekend. You're going away? Bella reiterated, dumbfounded. This was too good to be true. Had Jasper went ahead with his plan to send him away on a trip even though she advised him against it? Yeah, he said, shrugging out of his jacket and hanging it over the back of the nearest chair. Iris's cousin is getting married in California, and she asked me to come along. It was originally going to be at the 1st of June, but they kicked it up. He smirked lightly. Apparently her cousin just found out she was almost 3 months along and was worried she wasn't going to fit in her dress. Bella nodded mechanically. Seriously, she couldn't have scripted this better herself. He removed a carton of orange juice and crossed over to the sink to grab a clean glass from the dish rack. Our flight leaves Thursday night, the wedding Saturday, and then we're going to spend a few days extra to sightsee. His nose wrinkled slightly at the word, "We'll be back Tuesday morning." He glanced at Bella, who was standing silently in the same spot as she'd been when he first entered the kitchen, over the rim of his glass. That okay with you, kid? I figured you could crash at Jasper's while I was gone. That's great, Dad, Bella croaked, pausing to clear her throat before continuing. California's great. Me and Nan did our own sightseeing when I was a kid. Charlie finished the last bit of orange juice. You all right? Fine. Just trying to wrap my head around you willingly going to a wedding. Charlie grimaced. It was more the California bit that convinced me. Bella's smile became genuine, and the Iris part, she said slyly. Her father had been officially seeing the soft-spoken librarian since their date in February, and she had already been over a few times sharing dinner with them and vice versa. Bella liked her a lot. She was the only one other than herself that treated Jasper, Rose, and Emmett like they were normal people, and she had never seen her normally stoic father so happy. A dash of red colored his cheeks. Yeah, maybe that too, he mumbled. Need help packing? I think I can manage. The theme is beach casual, so I won't have to dig my good suit out of storage. Just your Hawaiian shirt, then? He raised an eyebrow. You're assuming I have one? You're saying you don't, she countered. He looked away. Knew it. Please tell me it's tasteful at least. Is any Hawaiian shirt tasteful? He replied dryly. I'm sure you'll rock it anyways, Don Hao. He chuckled. And you'll be okay? She brushed him off with a wave of her hand. Of course. Char's already on her way over to crash with me for a few nights. She looked up at Charlie. Is that okay? He raised his eyebrow. What's the special occasion? She shifted uneasily. The Cullens are here, visiting for a few days, and she really doesn't get along with them. It wasn't a complete lie. Charlotte really couldn't stand Edward. And Alice. Charlie snorted. Can't say I blame her. Bella grinned. It had taken a while, but she had finally found out why her dad didn't like the younger Cullens. Edward in particular. 2 months before she had moved here, Edward, in one of his ridiculously flashy cars, with Alice in the passenger seat, had run the only stoplight in the small town and ended up crashing into the back of Charlie's, who had been heading home from a shift at the time, police cruiser. Charlie had managed to walk away with nothing more than a bruise, where the seatbelt had dug into his chest, and a slight burn on his face from the airbag, but his cruiser had to be completely written off. While Carlisle and Esme had been nothing but apologetic and quickly offered up compensation when they found out, apparently Edward had been a little more concerned about the state of his car than the state of the angry police officer that had stalked towards them once he gained his equilibrium. And Alice howling about the dangers of black ice, which Charlie would reluctantly decide was a factor and let them off, had managed to subtly suggest that it had somehow been Charlie's fault for not doing his duty and warning people about this road. He sighed. As long as you don't forget it's a school night, or nights I should say, and you gotta keep it down tonight, I'm taking on a double tomorrow to make up for the time I'll be away. Bella nodded her head. Promise. Will the Cullens be here for long? He asked, frowning, because you guys can stay here for the weekend as long as you promise not to trash the house. No, they're only here for a couple days, I think, she lied. Besides, me and Emmett have plans at his house. Oh yeah? Like what? Video game marathon. You mean like every other weekend? And here I thought it was something exciting. He walked out of the kitchen and Bella exchanged a look of grim amusement with Nan as she pulled her cell phone out of her pocket and texted Jasper the words, "Dad's covered." Oh, Dad, if you only knew. Jasper glanced down at his phone, reading the message Bella had sent him with a grim smile. That's one thing taken care of, he thought, tucking the phone back into his back pocket. He looked up in time to see Carlisle get up and dust off his rumpled pants, nodding slightly at the advice that Peter was offering him and walking over to stand by Ismay. Edward took his place, a petulant look marring his pretty boy features. Is all this really necessary? Peter made a face and glared at the whiny vampire in front of him. Boy, you sure like to bitch a lot. The Cullens had arrived earlier today and were getting the same crash course in newborn Tornell 1, in a forest clearing far away from the one Jasper and the others had trained in. They were keeping that secret for a reason. Not only for the obvious one, but because he planned on hiding Bella in the small cabin when this finally kicked off. Most of the Cullens seemed to understand how serious and important this training was. Surprisingly, even Alice, but Edward had spent the last hour complaining. I can easily predict their next move from their thoughts. It's how I bested Emmett, he smirked and said vampire's direction. Jasper wished he could come to his defense, but he had witnessed the truth of Edward's words not 20 minutes ago. Oh really? Mind raper? Peter mocked casually. Read this. He darted towards Edward, and although he managed to avoid the first swipe of Peter's arm, he wasn't so lucky the second time, and soon Peter had him face-planted and sucking back a mouthful of dirt. What the hell was that? Edward demanded indignantly when he regained his footing. That was a newborn's thoughts, jackass. You seriously think they're going to be all? His words suddenly took on a crisp British accent. My word, I do believe I'll attack this good chap from the left with... I swing at him with my right. No one's thoughts are like that, Edward sneered. Which is exactly my point. You're too damn dependent on that gift of yours. For example, seconds later he swung a hand at Edward, who was already raising his own hands to cover his head, and drove his fist into his solar plexus. He rolled his eyes as Edward crumpled at the waist. See, I thought about hitting you in the head, even though I fully intended to aim for your stomach. He snickered. I even gave you a heads up, and you still didn't get it. Granted, newborns aren't nearly that clever, but they are that unpredictable. Remember that, or we won't only be burning their corpses, but yours as well. What were you thinking? He asked Peter, 10 minutes later, as he watched Carlisle and Edward trade blows. Remember that vampire at the camp, the one that had to be put down immediately? Jasper nodded, unable to stop himself from chuckling darkly at the remembrance of the newborn's name, according to the papers in his pocket. You mean Farrell? The one who was practically foaming at the mouth and couldn't stop screaming blood and kill over and over again. Just as rare as the silver streak in Charlotte's hair, you'd get the occasionally turning where it fried everything in the tourney's brain, everything except for the basic instinct, the need to feed. They were the closest things to zombies that the supernatural world would ever get. That's the one, Peter agreed. I just put those two words on repeat in my head and kicked the volume up to 11. Nice, Jasper congratulated absently as he watched Edward turn his back on a fallen Carlisle, shooting a smarmy smile in Jasper's direction. One more thing, he called out, seconds before Carlisle was on his feet, and hurling Edward to the ground. Never turn your back on your enemy. Rose, Jasper snapped when he saw her hesitate again. She was in the process of fighting Ismay, and seemed to be hesitating slightly. He could understand why. This woman had been their mother figure for a very long time, but right now they couldn't afford hesitations. He gestured toward Charlotte, who held up a finger, as she whipped out her phone from the bag she had packed earlier and shot off a text to who he suspected was Bella, telling her she was going to be late. Charlotte had no such hesitations. In the past, she had had a friendly but formal relationship with Asmi and, more importantly, was able to disconnect herself from a fight. No matter who the opponent, something both him and Peter could do as well. A little something left over from the wars. She switched out with Rose, giving no time for a clearly startled Esme to collect her thoughts before she made the first move. I'm sorry, Rose murmured, keeping her head down as she passed Jasper and headed towards Emmett, who was leaning up against a tree. Jasper reached out and clamped a comforting hand on Rose's shoulder, stopping her in her tracks. It's all right, he assured her. It was his fault. He should have gotten Charlotte to fight her in the first place. She squeezed his hand gratefully, and he dropped it, allowing her to continue past him. His eyes rolled as he saw Alice inch closer, keeping them resolutely forward as he silently critiqued Esme's fighting form. After getting over her obvious uneasiness at the borderline brutality in Charlotte's technique, she seemed to be holding her own against the fiery vamp. He had managed to keep his distance from Alice since they started train, hoisting her off on Rose and Charlotte instead, the latter who took great pleasure in getting the chance to smack the seer around. "Hi, Jazz." He shot her a warning glance. "Spare," she finished sullenly. "Alice," he returned stiffly. "Don't you think you've been mad at me long enough?" Jasper stiffened, wondering if she had phrased it that way on purpose. "Kept me waiting long enough." Those had been the first words she had ever spoken to him, in that diner, on that cold rainy night over 60 years ago. In the beginning, the man had been intrigued and, yes, attracted to this petite creature. But the vampire side, the darker part, the major part that he had actively started ignoring since he left the wars, had recoiled at the sight of her, unnerved by this stranger who latched on to him, sprouting tales about the supposed future they had. If he any sense about him, he would have been unsettled as well, but loneliness and desperation makes a man do crazy things. She had been one of the first people to smile at him, no repulsion or pity in her eyes, as she talked excitedly about this bright future where he finally belonged, where they belonged together. He supposed she had only been half right. Life had been rather idyllic after that, filled with money, comfort, large houses, fancy cars, name-brand clothing, and if Jasper had been a materialistic person, he could have been happy with that. But it was the drawbacks that came with it, mainly having to pretend to be a teenager when he'd been pushing 20 when he was alive, that soon proved to be the starting point for things beginning to go downhill. As the years passed, and he grew closer to Rose and Emmett, and found himself unknowingly distancing himself emotionally from the rest of the Cullens, it brought his dissatisfaction with Alice nearer to the surface as he realized that they didn't share the same relationship that those two did. She didn't feel like a mate, she felt more like a companion, someone to pass the time with. She certainly didn't treat him like a mate either, seemingly ignorant to the fact that their intimacy level was fading with every passing year, until it got to the point where she only attempted to entice him into bed when she sensed his interest was waning. In fact, their whole relationship seemed to consist of her doing the bare minimum to keep him interested. He had asked her once if she was as committed to this relationship as he was. Her response? "I married you, didn't I, silly?" It took many, many years of this hot and cold attitude towards him before he began actively pulling away from her in the early 90s, while at the same time, Alice seemed to be doing everything in her power to repair their fractured relationship. He would realize 17 years later with startling clarity that this was around the same time. Bella was born, grinning at the thought that he was subconsciously drawn to her then, just like Rose had been Emmett in the woods the day he'd been attacked. The breaking point finally came when he looked in his closet one day and realized that every article of clothing, right down to his Ralph Lauren boxer briefs and Armani socks, had been picked out by Alice. He had been reduced to nothing more than a store mannequin, a doll for Alice to indulge her desires to play dress-up. He had stared at the perfectly organized closet, separated alphabetically by designer and by color, growing more and more disgusted with each passing second. It had culminated with him gathering every last article of clothing in a hastily obtained garbage bag and ended with a large bonfire on the shore of a small creek he had frequented. Alice had been furious, of course, not only over the destruction of thousands of dollars worth of clothes, but because the last-minute decision had hidden it from her vision. In the middle of her chewing him out, he had come to another quick decision, leaving Alice barely enough time to gasp before he told her, "I'm done." "No," he decided as he shook the memories off. The memory of their breakup lingered, and he wondered, not for the first time, if Alice had tried so hard to keep the sputtering flame between them lit because she had seen Bella in his future. He scoffed lightly, as if she could have kept them apart. Emmett was right, he thought. All those years, she was jealous. Jealous of what Bella and I would have. I'm here to help you, to help her." "Doesn't that mean anything?" Her golden eyes met his searchingly. Jasper stared back as he weighed the truth of her words. She seemed so sincere, but that had always been the problem with Alice. Out of all the Cullens, she was the best at faking emotions, mostly because she believed them with such conviction. "We'll see," he replied warningly. "So, where is Ella?" He sighed heavily at her childish tactics. Are we really going to play that game, Alice? You're right, she said contritely. I'm sorry. Where's Bella? She corrected. Around. Jasper answered vaguely. Shouldn't she be here? Why? He countered. Well, shouldn't she know what's going on? Is this you looking out for her? He asked snidely. Do you really think I'd keep my mate? He took perverse pleasure in the way she flinched at that word. In the dark about something like this. She's aware of what's going on here. I was just... She huffed. How about you not just anything? Her eyes darkened and her mouth twisted with anger. I didn't have to come here, Jasper. I didn't have to warn you. I could have kept my mouth shut about that vision. Why didn't you? He retorted. You've certainly never had trouble doing it in the past. Her face fell. Maybe I'm trying to make up for all that, she whispered as she blinked up at him, venom misting her eyes. For all of it. He tilted his head and narrowed his eyes. She sounded so earnest, but there was still something he didn't fully trust about her. All her visions, every single last one, had benefited her in some way. So what exactly was she getting out of helping him? Of helping Bella? Was it really as simple as making repentance? If he was honest with himself, this usually was the way that Alice operated. More than once in the past, she'd manipulate a vision, usually a small one, to go in her favor, and when said person found out, usually by accident, she'd spend the next month trying to make up for it, and swearing she'd never do it again. Which she always did. He hummed in lieu of a response. It obviously wasn't the answer she was looking for, because she scowled. Actually, he added casually, leaning down so his nose was almost touching hers, there is something I want to add. I'll trust you for now. He smiled slightly when he saw her shoulders ease with relief, before his smile took on a sinister edge. But if you attempt to fuck me, my mate, or my family over in any way, it will be the last thing you do. He saw her throat constrict as she swallowed heavily, the pungent scent of fear swirling around her. She did an admirable job at hiding it, managing to look almost offended by the mere suggestion of screwing them over. She huffed and turned her petite nose in the air, stalking off with as much dignity as she could muster, but couldn't hide the wobble in her walk. Not from him. A smirking Peter was suddenly at his side. Put the fear of the god of war in her, didn't you? Why didn't you warn me? He asked, as he watched Alice stalk away. It's not like cell phones were a thing back then, and I could text you and be like, watch out for Crazy Town, lol, smiley face. And by the time I did know, you were already knee-deep in it. Wouldn't have done much good. Besides, made up for the oversight, didn't I? I suppose I finally understand why you made me come back. Jasper had been prepared to wash his hands completely of the Cullens, save for Emmett and Rose, who he seriously considered asking to leave with him. After things fell apart with Alice, things had definitely been awkward enough between them all to consider it, especially with how pro-Alice they were. He had left for a few months, tracking down Peter and Charlotte and attempting to repair their broken relationship, i.e. groveling his way back into their good graces. It had surprisingly been Peter to convince him that coming back was in his best interest, confusing the hell out of him by telling him that the bells were ringing for him to come back. He snorted. Cheeky bastard. What would have happened if I didn't come back? Peters looked away. I did get a glimpse of it once, he admitted. Did Emmett ever tell you he called me the first day you saw Bella in class, laughing about some girl that got you all kerfuffled like some teeny bopper during their first crush? Jasper scowled at the comparison. He also mentioned Edward being pissy, said the girl had been in his class first. That's when I knew things could have gone differently. He hesitated. And it wasn't pretty. Actually, it was downright nauseating. Why? What happened? He watched as Peter shot a quick look at Edward, who was arguing quietly with Carlisle and waving his hands in the air. Trust me, he said, you really don't want to know. It really wasn't hard to make the connections. Edward, he replied incredulously. You don't mean... He trailed off, swallowing thickly as a mixture of rage and disgust welled up within him. I told you that you didn't want to know, but... He searched wildly for something that would begin to explain how his mate could possibly end up with someone else. She's mine, he snarled mindlessly. Peter backed up uneasily. Oh, it wouldn't have lasted, he assured him. But Bella, he gazed turned introspective in remembrance, she would have been different, damaged. He looked at Jasper. If it's any consolation, a lot of things would have had to happen first, before that even came to pass. You going back was only one of many, he frowned. I'm not even sure why it showed me that. If I'm honest, it was completely irrelevant at the point. Maybe so I could tell you that, no matter how bad things get, it could have been a lot worse. Jasper glared at Edward's back, smirking victoriously when he saw Edward flinch under the weight of his stare and warily suggest to Carlisle that they should be heading back. I don't know if that makes it any better. You won the race. Why be pissed at the guy in second? You're terrible at consolation, you know that. Would you prefer it if I hugged you? I'll rip your goddamn arms off if you try. Why aren't you coming with me? Bella whispered. The day she'd been dreading for the last week was finally here. Jasper had called Charlotte less than 4 hours before sunset, telling her that Alice had announced that it was time. They had met up with half of the group. The Cullens had stayed behind at the house, in the woods behind Bella's house. She was already swaddled heavily in the overly large sweatshirt and tights that had buried in a pile of pine needles and cedar chips for the last 4 days. Jasper had admitted it wasn't necessarily the best plan, but now she smelled so heavily of the woodsy area surrounding them that it practically neutralized her own scent. Out of the corner of her eye, she watched as Charlotte handed Emmett a small cylindrical tube. Inside that tube was a small sample of Bella's blood that Charlotte had collected by way of one of the many syringes that Dr. Cullen had left behind at the house. Jasper and Emmett planned to smear a drop of it on their clothes in hopes that it would entice the newborns and Victoria towards the battlefield that they had chosen, a large semi-open field with plenty of large boulders surrounding it on the opposite side of where Bella would be, and as far away from the town as they could get. I have to be down on the front lines. I need to make sure they don't get anywhere close to you. Always the consummate soldier, she said fondly. But while you're down here protecting me, who'll protect you? Don't worry, Emmett said, approaching them from the side. Me and Rosie will have his back. Always, Rose promised both Jasper and Bella. A faint ding sounded in the air, and Jasper stiffened, pulling out his cell phone. He glanced down at the screen, and his face hardened. It's almost time. Bella lurched forward and clutched at him fearfully. Why do I feel like I'm never going to see you again? He clutched her back, though not quite as tightly. You will, he swore vehemently. Tears welled up in Bella's eyes. She wondered if Jasper even realized he was shaking. Jasper stood off to the side, watching the hushed and tearful conversation Bella, Emmett, and Rose were sharing. Charlotte was behind them, holding Jet gently in her arms. It had been decided earlier that her and Peter would guard her at the cabin, and that the pup would be brought along for comfort. However small it would be, I got a bad feeling about this, Peter muttered under his breath. I thought feelings were my area of expertise. I'm serious, Major. I feel like there's something I'm missing, something important. Jasper pulled Peter away from the group, ordering Charlotte to stay put with a swift shake of his head, and ducked behind a large tree, which provided them with some semblance of privacy. Bad? He asked quietly. Is it ever good when it's something important? Any guesses? He shook his head. For the first time, it's like I'm going in blind. The only thing I know for certain is that this has got to happen. Only problem is, I don't know what this is. It could be anything. It could be that the little old lady in Portugal has to cross the street. At Jasper's less than amused gaze, he backtracked. Okay, I'm stretching, but it's not a good feeling. Not knowing. Sounds like someone is a little too dependent on their gift. Don't you dare throw that back in my face, you bastard, he hissed. There's a big difference between perving on someone's thoughts and knowing if someone is going to die. Jasper went rigid. Who's going to die? He demanded. Peter threw up his hands. No one. Everyone. That little old lady from Portugal. I don't know. Relax, Peter. It's all right. You're not omniscient, nor do I expect you to be. God forbid if you were. That got a small smile out of him. You knew it was coming. You let us get prepared. And you and Char have promised to protect Bella. To the death. Preferably theirs and not ours. And that's all I expect of my second in command. Peter snapped out a quick salute. At ease, soldier. He ran a shaky hand through his disheveled locks. I'm not gonna lie, Pete. I really wish you hadn't told me this. I have to be strong for Bella, but I've never been more unsure of myself. I've fought in hundreds of battles. Why is this so different? Because you've never been protecting your mate before. I can't lose her, Pete, he said softly. Peter clamped his hands tightly on Jasper's shoulders. You won't, Jas. He grinned slightly. I know it. Jasper allowed a small smirk in return before closing his eyes and summoning the personae he hadn't needed for almost 80 years. He could feel his eyes darkening, his stance straightening, and his features hardening as an eerie, battle-ready calm spread through him. Protect, mate, his mind hissed. Major, Peter murmured, lowering his head in submission. Jasper jerked out a short nod and stepped out from behind the tree. The vampires of the group each inhaled swiftly when they caught sight of him, before dropping their heads like Peter had done moments ago. His beautiful mate, instead of looking confused, instinctively seemed to understand what was going on and lowered her head as well, injecting a little vampire speed into his actions. He was in front of her mere seconds later, gently tilting her chin up with one finger. "My mate never has to lower her eyes to me," he said, his voice gravely and his accent more pronounced as he stared into her brown eyes. Bella had immediately sensed the difference in her mate as he appeared from behind the tree, his stance both authoritative and predatory, before the others had lowered their heads. His honey eyes had darkened to black, but it wasn't quite the same color as when he was hungry. Instead, they swirled like a thunderstorm was slowly brewing behind them. She had seen glimpses of what he called the major personae these last few weeks, along with something similar in Peter and Charlotte's eyes, and while she had never feared it, she was still trying to decide if it was a separate entity altogether. Rose and Emmett never seemed to have this, and she totally blamed Dexter for the reference, Dark Passenger, and she wondered if the wars had something to do with it. Looking at Jasper now and seeing the love that his major side held for her in his eyes, she realized it was simply two sides of the same coin, merely one half of the whole that was her mate. To show that she understood this, and still loved all of him, she lowered her head as well. He was speaking to her seconds later, the harsher rumble to his words sending a pleasant shiver down her spine. As he pushed her chin up, his dark eyes had softened slightly, glowing at her acceptance. "Yes, Major," she whispered back thickly, her chocolate eyes looking up at him reverently, without the slightest trace of fear. He captured her lips in a kiss harder than usual, biting at her lips and swallowing her whimpers. She was just as frantic, curling her fingers in his hair and pulling hard enough, that had he been human, she would have ripped a chunk out. "I love you," she panted against his lips when he pulled back. His eyes briefly returned to his familiar gold. "And I love you, my southern belle," he whispered back. Her eyes fluttered shut as she allowed his softly spoken words to soothe her nerves. She heard a faint rustle of wind, and when she opened her eyes, Jasper, Rose, and Emmett were gone. Bella paced the old but well-maintained wood floor nervously, alternating her glances between the corner where Nain hovered and the small window where Peter stood guard. She had never been claustrophobic, but, looking around this cabin barely bigger than her room, she could almost feel the walls closing in. An hour had passed since they got here, and so far things had been quiet. Almost too quiet. "You should be with Jasper," she directed silently towards Nan, not wanting to spook Peter, who already looked on edge. "What could I possibly bring to the table?" "You could watch over him." "He doesn't need me to watch over him," she returned, turning her head away and frowning. Bella stopped and stared hard at her. "But I do?" "Nan, what's going to happen?" "I don't know, Chang," Nan replied, clearly distraught. "I don't know," she repeated brokenly, her breath hitching in her throat. "I'm scared." Bella's voice was little more than a whisper in her head. Nan drifted over and cupped Bella's cheeks in her cool hands. "Everything will be all right," she murmured, but her eyes contradicted the confidence she tried to inject into her words. Bella raised her own hand to curl around the one still on her cheek, grasping it tightly, like she had felt with Jasper earlier. A part of felt like this was the last time she'd ever get to see her Nan. The thought had her pulling away from her touch as she resumed her pacing. "Peaches, you have to stop pacing. You're making me nervous as hell." Bella stopped and shot a glare at Peter. "How do you think I feel?" she asked, wringing her hands. "You can look out the window and see your mate, while mine's on the other side of town, fighting in a battle that's all my fault." "How is this your fault?" "A mate for a mate," she mocked bitterly. "It was me he was protecting in the field that day." Peter leaned against the windowsill. "And he should have let them kill you. Is that what you're trying to say?" "Well, when you say it that way," she grumbled, perching the edge of the bed. She shot a small frown at Jet, who was happily chewing on a rawhide bone without a care in the world. She only wished she could be that oblivious. Her leg began bouncing up and down as her nerves once again got the best of her. The bed creaked as Peter sat beside her. "Stop," he ordered gently, placing a cool hand firmly on her knee. "You're clearly underestimating your mate. You know his history. These guys are rank amateurs compared to him. You said they were dangerous. And they are to unskilled vampires like Eddie Boy. Honestly, I'll be very surprised if he makes it out of this unscathed. But Jasper is trained for this. He has fought hundreds of newborns, and every time he got a little better. He will be fine." he said with such conviction that Bella felt a wry smile grace her lips. Either he really knew this, or he was a better liar than Nan. You're pretty good at this comforting thing, you know? He laughed. Funny, Jasper would say differently. His laughter cut off abruptly as his whole body tensed. What is it? Bella asked worriedly. Sure, Peter replied absently. He moved to the small cabin window and peeked out. I can't see her. Nan? Nan nodded and drifted through the walls. She's agitated. His gaze shifted between her and the window, his eyes crinkled with obvious concern for his mate. I think we've been breached. But how? Bella cried. Why are they even over here? You guys took every precaution bringing me here. They don't have any reason to be on this side of town. Yeah, they do, Peter replied, staring at her grimly. Bella jerked when Nan popped into the room instead of entering the same way she had exited. That, added to the panic on her face, screamed emergency. She can hold her own, Peter replied thickly. You bastard, she screamed. Screw the promise. If that was my mate out there, I'd tear the world apart to get to them. They both heard a loud crunch and Bella hurried to the window in time to see a tree off in the distance crumple to the ground. There, she pointed. It's close. If anyone makes it up here, I'll scream. I swear. Just go, please, she begged. I'll never forgive myself if she dies for me. No one should have to die for me. Bella reached for the closest object, a copy of War and Peace of All Things, and lobbed at his head. The spine broke upon impact, the pages scattering around him like written snowflakes. Go, she shrieked. His gaze jumped between Bella and the door. Don't even think about coming out after me, he warned as he darted for the entrance. I may be a little crazy, she spat, but I'm not suicidal. As soon as he was out the door, Bella curled into herself, a part of her immediately regretting her decision to tell him to go. 5 sets of eyes watched through the thick brush that surrounded the cabin as the vampire darted out the door. They turned back towards the cabin, 2 of them chuckling when they heard the lock click into place. As if that will keep us out, one thought darkly, reveling in the sound of the girl's quickened heartbeat. Her fear would make her blood taste that much sweeter. It's time, another's voice whispered gleefully as they crept slowly towards the cabin. Ugly bastard, aren't you? Peter muttered as his fingers curled in the vampire's greasy hair. He tossed the head to the side and kneeled down beside Charlotte. Around them lay the scattered parts of what looked like 4 other vampires, Peter noted absently. He brushed aside a lock of his mate's ruby hair and studied the crack running along her cheek. It was already healing, and the only venom present appeared to be her own, so he knew that there was no worry of it scarring. You all right? He asked as she helped her to her feet. I could have handled it, she retorted, brushing the dirt and pine needles from her clothes. He snorted. It looked it. Her eyes narrowed at him. Where's Bella? Back at the cabin, he replied uncomfortably. You left her? She demanded. She's fine. A high-pitched scream pierced the air, causing the venom in their veins to freeze. Bella, Charlotte whispered, horrified. The 2 immediately rushed towards the cabin, arriving in just enough time to witness the tail end of Bella disappearing into the trees to their left as she struggled on the back of an unidentifiable vampire. Bella, no, they both roared at the same time and without even giving it a second thought, promptly gave chase. Both failed to see the figure smiling at them from the window. A half-naked Bella squirmed against the powerful arms that gripped her, tears streaming down her face and coating the hand that covered her mouth, which stopped her from calling out to Peter and Charlotte. Thanks to the broken door, she could hear the thump of their feet as they approached the cabin and the subsequent scream of her name. Then the footsteps veered away from them and, with growing panic, Bella listened as they quickly fade in the opposite direction. Not very bright, are they? Where are those battle instincts, Jazzy always used to brag about? Alice turned away from the window with a large grin and nodded for Edward to drop his hand from Bella's mouth. Pet, she attempted, as soon as it was uncovered, only for the word to choke off when Alice took a menacing step forward. None of that now, though I suppose it doesn't really matter. He can't hear you anyways. What did you do to them? Me? I didn't do anything. No, that buffoon and his whore are too busy chasing after you. Remember, strip? Alice barked, seconds after forcing her way through the now broken door. Bella blinked rapidly. Surprised, and yet somehow not as Alice, Edward and 3 other unfamiliar vampires, 2 males, 1 female, stepped through the door. 4 of them hovered around the entrance, while one, an intimidating man with dark black tattoos decorating his massive arms, moved to the corner and perused the scene disinterestedly. Her eyes stayed on him long enough to see his ruby gaze crinkle in concentration as he stared at her. A shiver ran over her body as she felt an unfamiliar sensation coiling around her insides and centering on her heart. She had never felt more violated in her life. Her gaze snapped away from the strange vampire when Alice angrily repeated her order and clutched her clothes tighter to her body. "Never," she hissed. "Oh, you'll do it." Or, "Shut up," she roared at a wildly barking jet. The pup fell silent with a whimper before the acrid scent of urine overpowered the musty air in the small cabin. Alice rolled her eyes. "Just lovely. As I was saying, remove your clothes, now or Edward will do it for you." Edward's darkened eyes gave her a once-over. "My pleasure," he murmured, moving forward. "No," Bella yelped, turning her shaking hands to her clothes and pulling of the sweater and tights as quickly as she could. Tears of humiliation stung her eyes as two of the three male vampires in the room gave a low, lusty growl. "Hand them over," Alice demanded boredly. She snatched them out of Bella's hands and turned to the only other female vampire in the room, roughly the same height as Bella and with long golden brown hair. "Put these on, now." As the female swiftly tugged Bella's clothes on over her own, Alice turned her gaze towards the last member of their group, the youngish-looking man with pale, almost bleached blonde hair. "Do your thing, Lex." Aforementioned Lex stepped up behind the female vampire and easily swung her up on her shoulder. As he turned, Bella noticed the air around him shifted imperceptibly and gasped when the woman's now mahogany head flipped up and Bella's own face grinned at her cruelly. Alice giggled as she eyed the thin tank top and panties Bella was wearing. "Or at least what they think is you. I thought Victoria was foolish for changing so many and drawing unnecessary attention to herself, but it ended up working out quite well when one of the newborns turned out to be very special. He can create illusions, so perfectly detailed. You'd swear it was the real thing. He was a magician when he was alive. Isn't that a scream? If my gift wasn't clearly superior, I'd almost be jealous." "You're working with Victoria," Alice scoffed. "Working with her makes it sound like we're equals. She's my puppet. She was determined to avenge her sweet James's death, and I merely improved on that. She was going to run back to Forks, all half-cocked, and get herself killed in the process. I gave her life direction. By encouraging her to turn innocent people?" Alice made a show of examining her nails. "Who's to say they were innocent? You humans are all guilty of something. How did you even find me?" Alice smirked and glided over to the small table, pushed up against the wall, and fingered the canvas bag filled with food that sat on it. "Peter really shouldn't have left this bag in the kitchen. It was all too easy to—" Alice trailed off and reached into the bag, pulling out a small black chip. "I'm a little disappointed in myself for having to resort to such high-tech tactics. I mean, who am I, James Bond?" she tittered. "But it's a good thing I did. That pine scent really threw me off. Jasper always has been disgustingly clever. Why are you doing this? Why are you going through all this trouble? For 40 years he was mine, and I was his everything," she spat. Her eyes, while still golden, gleamed with what Bella was quickly beginning to recognize was insanity. Jasper had admitted to her a long time ago that Alice had been committed to an insane asylum right around the time she'd been changed, but implied that her visions, she was one of the few vampires whose gift wasn't accredited to her turning, had been responsible. Bella suspected the reasons were much darker than that. "That all changed 18 years ago when I got a blurry vision of a disgusting human girl," she continued. "He started to pull away from me, like he sensed you were out there, questioning everything I said or did, making the family question me." "And you did all this to hurt him?" Alice blinked owlishly. "Why would I want to hurt my Jazzy? I love him." "He's not yours," Bella spat. "And whose fault is that? He'd still be mine if you hadn't took him from me. I did everything I could to stop it from happening, trying to convince Carlisle not to move to this horrid little town, killing Charlie so you wouldn't have a reason to move here, hoping that van would hit you." She tilted her head angrily. "How did you manage to escape that one anyways?" For the first time since he grabbed her, Bella stopped struggling in Edward's embrace. "You tried to— my dad, the accident," she stuttered out. Alice glared at Edward as if Charlie not being dead was the biggest inconvenience ever. "It's all his fault for hesitating," she sniffed. "No, he was late," he argued back. Alice huffed and stamped her foot. "He wasn't supposed to stop for that coffee. That last-minute decision ruined everything." She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, and when she opened them, she was smiling again. None of that matters now, because when all that failed, I got such a beautiful vision in that field. Sure, I knew it would take a little time to come together, but I didn't mind. She trailed off, and her smile became cruel. Kept me waiting long enough, she cackled, her laughter slightly hysterical as if she was sharing a private joke with herself. She sobered. In the end, it proved to be the solution to both of our problems. Both? Bella asked, shakily. From behind her, she felt Edward drag his nose against her neck, his hands trailing dangerously close to her breasts. Only a human, and your mind is silent to me, he muttered angrily against her throat. Pity I can't hear how afraid you are. I'm not afraid of you, Bella spat, trying to convey bravado she really didn't feel. Liar, he whispered, kissing the skin where her neck met her shoulder. And your blood, he moaned. Your blood smells so good. It has since the first day of school. It sings to me, taunting me with its song, and ever since then, it's all I've ever been able to think about. My desire for it controls me, and I can't think of anything but you and your blood. Nothing should have that much power over me. I need to take back my control. You won't get that by killing me. He chuckled darkly. Maybe not, but it's a start. Jet, who had seemingly recovered from her earlier fear, suddenly made her move, jumping forward and sinking her canines into Alice's bare arm. There was a violent cracking sound as it broke every single tooth in her mouth, but she still hung on, smearing blood from her busted gums all over the pale skin of Alice's forearm. Alice snarled and wrapped her unencumbered hand around Jet's throat, squeezing until there was a sickening crunch and Jet fell limp. She threw the suddenly silent dog at the wall, where it fell to the floor with a dull thud and laid motionless. The action had startled Edward enough to loosen his grip around Bella. You bitch! She shrieked, darting forward, not unlike her faithful dog had moments earlier, and slapping Alice across the face. She bit her tongue hard to silence the cry when she felt the bones in her hand shatter. That wasn't very smart, Alice taunted. It was worth it, Bella spat, cradling her limp wrist to her chest as Edward's hands encircled her again. Marie looked helplessly around the room, sparing a moment to gaze sorrowfully at the broken figure of Chime's beloved dog, as her granddaughter once again struggled in the boy's grasp. She was angry at herself for not seeing this coming, all the suspicion she had felt towards the two vampires in this room, and she had done nothing to prevent it. The pieces had been there, but she failed to put them together. If Chime died in this cabin, it would be no one's fault but her own. Her eyes darted frantically around the small space, but the room was sparsely decorated, with little more than a bed, a small table, and a lamp, and there was absolutely nothing that could be used to defend her. Not that it would do much good anyways, she had already seen the damage that had been done to Jet. And if she even attempted to react, she knew that the panic it would incite would only lead to Bella's death. Is this what is supposed to happen? She raged to no one in particular. Is my Chime supposed to be tortured before joining me in the afterlife? No, this is all wrong, she said out loud. She wouldn't let this happen. She couldn't let this happen. She knew what she had to attempt, something she had never done before, something that could end up blowing up in her face and causing her to blink out of existence. But Chime, her sweet Bella, needed her to try. Even if it was the last thing she'd do. She gathered every single ounce of energy, sent a silent prayer up to her William, and disappeared. Nan, Bella cried, panicked when the only hope she had left disappeared. Nan, Alice mocked, so pathetic, crying out for your Grammy. Bella glared up her, Jasper will come for me. Alice chuckled. That's what you think. See Ricardo there? She pointed at the vampire still standing stoically in the corner. He's gifted too, you see. He can. How do I put this? Tap into the bonds and manipulate them, mimic them, falsify them, what have you. Right now, Jasper is feeling how calm, cool, and collected his brave little mate is, with perhaps just a dash of nervousness so he doesn't get too suspicious. Isn't that right, Ricky? Ricardo, he corrected darkly, with a thick Spanish accent. The bond is stronger than I am used to, but he does not suspect anything. Do you know what that means? Alice whispered. Jasper is not coming for you. He is too busy chasing down that patsy of a redhead, while Rose and Emmett are, who knows, we're defending your honor, and Peter and Charlotte are following little more than a mirage. You are alone. Do not forget, when this is over, you will tell me where you have taken my wife, Ricardo hissed. Yes, Alice agreed, waving her hand dismissively, angry that the moment had been interrupted. but smiling in gleeful satisfaction when she saw the tears dripping down Bella's face. She shifted slightly, effectively shielding her face from the vampire in the corner, and, with a wide grin mouth, "She's already dead." Alice's hand snapped out, effectively shattering Bella's jaw. "You don't learn, do you? Since you seem to have trouble keeping quiet, I thought I'd lend a hand." She fluttered the fingers of said hand and tittered at her own joke. Bella whimpered and focused her gaze on the battered remains of her dog. She only hoped her death was as swift as Jet's had been. "Alice," Edward said impatiently, increasing the pressure on Bella's arms. "We don't have time for this." "Yes," Ricardo agreed, his face twisting in discomfort. "He is tapping into the bond right now, and I cannot hold him off much longer." "I suppose we should hurry this along," Alice sighed. "We have to give ourselves some time to come up with a proper story." It was difficult to speak through the agony of a broken jaw, but Bella managed to slur out, "Or Jay Tierlirlivul." Alice's face darkened. "Don't call me crazy," she snarled before her twisted features smoothed out into one of placidity. "I'm still having a tough time deciding who gets to kill you." "You promised me I could have her blood," Edward hissed, tightening his hands around her lower abdomen and cracking a rib in the process. Alice rolled her eyes. "It's not like it'll go bad immediately after she dies. You'll still get to taste her, don't worry." Bella's vision grew hazy as the pain in her hand, jaw and ribs combined to make one never-ending wave of agony. As they continued to argue about who got to kill her, all Bella could do was hope that she'd at least get a chance to see Jasper one last time. Jasper watched with grim satisfaction as Victoria's head thumped to the ground. In the beginning, he had torn through the pack of the newborns, Rose, Emmett, and the Cullens at his side, but he had eventually caught sight of Victoria hovering in the tree line. He had lost track of the others after that, focusing his rage completely on the woman who dared to threaten his mate as she led him on a merry chase halfway to the other side of town, but thankfully still a good distance from where Bella hid. The hand holding the knife hung limply at his side. His own venom dripped down his arm to commingle with the venom that coated the blade. The right arm sleeve of his black sweater was torn, framing a large but relatively minor bite on his lower forearm. It was the only new mark he attained during the battle. The red-headed vampire at his feet had been responsible for that, but going for his arm instead of his throat had been a fatal mistake. "Fool," the decapitated head gurgled around a mouthful of venom. Jasper scowled down at it before bringing his thickly soled boot down hard enough to shatter her skull, and effectively silencing the watery chuckles it had broken into. His lighter was out of his pocket just as swiftly. He was careful to use his left hand and keep it as far away from his other arm as possible. A soft clicking noise followed as he hit against his knee, causing the small flame to flicker to life. He didn't even bother to gather her body parts, instead touching the flame to each individual part that lay scattered around him. Now that the intoxication of battle was beginning to wear off, Jasper finally noticed that his bond with Bella was muted, thick, almost like wading through quicksand. He concentrated on it, wondering if it was some sort of fail-safe for his own heightened emotions, and was only partially nullified by the dull calm he could sense. The major side hadn't faded completely, and was on instant alert. "Something is wrong," it hissed. Seconds before the air around him grew staticky, followed by a low-pitched humming noise that set his teeth on edge. He watched, mystified as a figure slowly took shape behind what once was Victoria's head. The woman was transparent, practically a literal representation of the word ghost, but her features were defined enough that he, thanks to pictures, immediately recognized her. Nani asked incredulously. One of the pictures Bella had shown of her was when she was on the cusp of 60, youth and vitality still very much apparent in her face, and Bella had always arisen that she still looked like that to her. But the woman in front of him, as faded as she was, looked exhausted, her chalky gray features lined and drained of any life they may have once had. She nodded curtly, her misty figure rapidly flickering like the flames on the woman at her feet. "No time to explain, Ranger." Her voice was raspy and weathered. "Traitors are in your midst, and you must go back to the cabin immediately. Chime needs you, and time is running out." Her figure sputtered before immediately disappearing, like a light switch had suddenly been flicked off. He had so many questions racing through his head at that moment as time seemed to still around him. But when the ghost of your mate's dead grandmother tells you to do something, you do it. "Traitors!" The word echoed in his head, and he roared as he quickly made the connections. He had never run so fast in his life. Peter and Charlotte rapidly caught up to the laughing vampire. They would have caught him sooner, but with Bella on his shoulder, they couldn't risk tackling him. The mere action would probably kill her. The laughing vampire came to the edge of the small ravine and came to an abrupt stop, shocking both Peter and Charlotte, who dug their heels into the damp ground beneath them. "Drop her," Peter ordered lowly. The blonde vampire smirked. "Okay," he agreed, good-naturedly pushing heavily on Bella's kicking legs and sending her over his shoulders and down into the ravine. "No," Peter howled, diving for Bella as Charlotte tackled the blonde vampire's midsection hard enough to practically cleave him in half. Peter landed on the bottom of the rocky ravine, cushioning Bella from the fall. "Char?" he yelled. "I'm fine," she called back down, followed by the familiar sound of a vampire being ripped apart. "Bella? Peaches?" he exclaimed worriedly, as he flipped her over in his lap. "Are you all right?" The woman brushed her significantly lightened brown locks and gazed up at Peter with menacing ruby eyes. "My hero," she cooed sarcastically. Within seconds, Peter had his hand curled around her neck, pinning the female vampire to the rocky wall behind her. "Who are you?" he snarled. "I'm a little disappointed," the female choked out, squirming in his grip. "She told us to fear you, but you're so pathetic you didn't even realize you weren't chasing the real thing." She lobbed a big wad of venom in his face. "Real scary," she mocked. He wiped the venom away. "Who exactly is she?" "I'll never tell," she sing-songed. Peter's vision was overcome with a brilliant flash as he was shown exactly who was behind this and exactly what she was about to do. And with a roar, he ripped her head from her shoulders. He was already too late. Collapsing to the ground as the headless body slid down the wall, Peter tilted his head back and howled, "I didn't know." The cabin walls shook with the force of Jasper's roars as he broke through the now demolished cabin door, the whites of his eyes almost disappearing completely as they were met with the view inside. "Alice Maid" was all he managed to get out before it was drowned out by the metallic screech of metal as the blade Jasper held sliced through the air and cleanly separated his head from his body. So fast you could barely track his movements, Jasper darted towards Alice, who was trying to make her escape, and dropped into a crouch, cutting her off at the knees. As she thumped to the ground, he turned his attention to the last vampire in the room, who managed to get off a single swing before Jasper caught his throat in an iron grip. "I was trying to save my wife," he wheezed, his accent thickened and made barely understandable by the hand crushing his larynx. "I don't care," Jasper growled gutturally as his fingers tore through his neck. Dismissing the vampire as his decapitated corpse slumped to the ground, Jasper turned coal-black eyes down to Alice, who was pulling herself desperately towards the door, dragging her useless legs behind her and leaving a trail of venom in her wake. When she saw that her pleas were falling on deaf ears, her face darkened and her lips twisted into a cruel, victorious smirk. "It doesn't matter," she spat. "You're too late. Now she'll never have you. You're all mine. All mine." "I was never yours," he hissed, and brought the blade down. Shaking off the haze of disorientation that came with diving that deeply into his vampiric side, farther than he had ever gone since the wars, Jasper stumbled towards his fallen mate. He had smelled her blood from minor cuts on a handful of occasions and had never been bothered by it, but in the back of his head he had always wondered if that same ironclad control would exist if more of her blood was factored into the equation. Now he knew, unaffected by the blood that practically soaked the wooden boards beneath her. The venom that had pooled in his mouth in reaction to battle vanished completely as Jasper collapsed to his knees beside Bella, cradling his mate's broken body in his arms and keening lowly when he couldn't hear a heartbeat. "Don't do this to me, darling," he begged. "You can't do this to me." "Do it now," a voice ordered. Jasper's head snapped up in surprise when he realized he was no longer alone in the cabin. Nan stood over him, looking as drained as she had in the clearing, but still visible to his eyes. "You have her permission," she said urgently. "She wants you to change her, but—" He looked down at his mate's pale face, straining his senses, and was finally able to make out the faint but stilted sound of her heartbeat. He snarled lowly when he caught the scent of Edward's venom in her veins, and although he would never willingly offer him thanks, a part of him was grateful that the small amount, just barely enough to begin the change, albeit a slow and agonizingly painful one, had kept her heart beating when, in any other circumstance, with this amount of blood, it would have stopped. "Do it now," Nan barked again. Her life force is fading swiftly. "I love you, Belle," he whispered. Muttering a quick prayer to the god he had lost faith in a long time ago, Jasper sunk his teeth into the unmarked side of her throat. Squeezing his eyes closed tightly with guilt, he began injecting his venom into her bloodstream, determined to eradicate every last drop of Edward's venom. He owed her that much at least. Peter and Charlotte burst through the brush surrounding the cabin. The first thing their senses registered was the sickly sweet scent of venom intertwined with the scent of blood, perfuming the rapidly cooling air. They looked at the cabin long enough to glimpse the decapitated corpse blocking the entryway before their eyes snapped to the figure hunched near the edge of the cliffs, his skin lit up by a glorious sunset in the background, and sparkling faintly. His shoulders shook as he wept over the limp body in his arms. Charlotte's breath hitched as Peter stumbled his way towards them, prepared for the worst. As he got closer, he exhaled shakily as he heard the distinct sound of venom rushing its way through Bella's veins. It sounded different than blood. The substance was thinner, so it moved faster, almost humming as it did so. Jasper, he breathed in relief as his vision flashed and he knew what was to come. Peter's words choked off when Jasper's neck twisted hard enough to make Linda Blair proud and glared at him with rapidly darkening eyes. Seconds later, Peter was slammed to the ground. Jasper's blood-stained hand clamping around his neck, his fingers squeezing hard enough to hurt. "You left her," Jasper snarled, his eyes accusatory and slightly crazed. She almost died," he squeezed harder. "You promised to protect her. You failed." "Man," Charlotte began hesitantly in the background. "Silence," Jasper roared. "I trusted you, both of you." "Ranger," a calm, weathered female voice interjected. Though Peter couldn't see who had spoken, he saw Charlotte's, who had neared as close to Jasper as she dared. Eyes widened in disbelief. "Don't blame him," the voice continued. "Chime made him go. Ruby was in trouble." "That doesn't make it okay," he gritted out, angrily, though the pressure on Peter's neck lessened. "It's over," the voice spoke firmly. "What's done is done, and Chime will be fine." Jasper stared hard down at him, and Peter nodded emphatically to the words she had spoken. Jasper eased off of his chest and allowed Charlotte to rush to his side to help him up. Peter waved off her attempt and rose enough to perch himself on his knees. "I am so sorry, Jasper," he whispered brokenly. His ruby eyes misted with venom. "I failed you. I deserve whatever punishment you deem worthy." He lowered his head in shame. Jasper's gaze flitted briefly to the abandoned knife that he didn't even remember dropping on the ground before returning back to Peter. Charlotte had curled herself around her mate, fear permeating her emotions and her stance conveying that, while she may accept Peter's choice to offer himself up in repentance, whatever Jasper planned to do to him, he'd have to do to her too. He sighed loudly, his shoulders drooping with impossible sensation of exhaustion. "No, Peter, He paused and closed his eyes, battling back the hot flash of rage at the remembered sight of Edward's teeth buried in his mate's throat. "It's not your fault." He walked back to Bella's still form and gathered her in his arms. "I should have seen this coming." He pressed his forehead against the clammy skin of Bella's cheek. "This is my fault." Something swatted his head, the pressure feather light, but it got his attention enough to look up and see Nan hovering over him. "You're not going to spend eternity playing the blame game, Ranger," she scolded. "I can tell you right now that Chime won't allow it." "But it wasn't supposed to happen like this," he insisted. I don't even know if this is what she really wanted." He cursed himself for not sitting her down and having a more frank discussion than the one they'd had the other day. He had deliberately been putting it off until after graduation, wanting her to get to finish that important human chapter of her life before she had to address the beginning of a whole new story. He could still hear himself saying, "I always knew what your answer would be," and he still believed that, but had never had the chance to discuss with her what her choice would inevitably cost her, what she would be forced to give up. Turnings required plans and preparations. This wasn't the days during the wars where people disappeared without nary a thought. There were steps that needed to be taken, and now all that was thrown out the window. She wouldn't have wanted you to save her. He looked down and watched as Bella's forehead creased in pain. Yet she remained silent. "Is that what I did? Saved her?" he asked disgustedly. When he said he wanted the moment to be right, this wasn't what he meant. Far from it. "Oh, you have no idea, Ranger. Not only here today, but you saved her before she was even born." Jasper frowned. He appreciated Nain's efforts to make him feel better, but this was just ridiculous. "Not to mention impossible." "How?" he asked skeptically. Non-mad knelt down beside him. Do you remember a night many, many years ago when foolish pregnant woman decided to take a walk through a dark alley and a vampire came to her rescue? Jasper's eyes widened as he was transported back to that misty spring eve. He had been with Alice for a little over a year at that point, and they'd been mere months away from finding the Cullens. Or technically, the Cullens would find them. According to Alice, they were due to move to Phoenix sometime in the next 3 months, and Jasper remembered being amused that a group of vampires were going to live in such a predominantly sunny city. In the end, they would only end up living there for 5 months. He and Alice were basically squatting in this rundown house on the outskirts of town, something she'd been complaining about for days at that point. And Jasper, feeling the barest beginnings of oppressiveness, unaware that it would eventually control his life for decades to come, managed to slip away from her while she was lost in a shiny vision of the future she'd have with the Cullens. He was never really sure why he wandered into town that night. Because of his newness to the animal diet, he usually kept to the outer woods, but he liked to believe it was more about testing himself and not because he was actively looking for a reason to slip up. He had been staring at a couple canoodling under a street lamp for the better part of 10 minutes, entertaining thoughts he wasn't particularly proud of, when he heard a choked scream from an alley roughly a block from where he stood, and the familiar scent of another vampire, a human drinker, smelling heavily of unwashed skin, stale blood, and fear. It was mixed in with another scent, like sunshine filtering in through the forest trees, and he had reacted without even thinking. As the body of the unnamed vampire fell at his feet and the words of advice rolled off his lips, he'd only managed to catch a quick glimpse of the woman he'd rescued. Pretty, dark hair, dress clinging gently to a stomach slightly swelled with pregnancy before she had run off. He had never told Alice what had happened that night. He would eventually come to realize that those split-second decisions shielded him from her visions and would use this to his advantage. But the feeling he'd had afterwards from actually helping someone and not hurting them would aid him with his struggle against his bloodlust for years. Whenever he got close to slipping, he'd remember that woman. That was you? She nodded. You're safe, ma'am. Go home, and stay out of dark alleyways in the future. She smiled at him slightly. Sound familiar? I never forgot that, and I knew it was you the minute you pretended to tip your hat at me in the clearing that day. So, you see, you made it possible for my chime to even exist. And for that reason, I know she was meant for you. Meant for this. But you couldn't have wished this life for her. What, a life of love? No, he sneered self-deprecatingly. A life of being a monster. That same feather-light sensation brushed across his face as she slapped him. What did Chime tell you about that? She chastised. Am I ecstatic that she'll be a vampire? She sighed. I'm not going to lie to you and say I am, but I know she won't be anything like the ones you dealt with today. You and your family, her family, won't let that happen. He felt Peter at his shoulder. I'm sorry, who exactly are you? Jasper couldn't stop from grinning as Nan rolled her eyes. Who do you think I am, Pumpkin? She snapped sarcastically. Know a lot of ghosts, do you? You can't, he sputtered. How is that even possible? She snorted. You're a walking, talking corpse, and you're going to ask me about what's possible and what's not. I think we can all agree that the world works in mysterious ways. She looked down at her hands, and Jasper knew she was thinking the same thing. He was. Why can we still see you? Whatever you did, it looked like it took a lot out of you. It did. I thought for certain I was done for. She twisted her transparent but still clearly visible hand and flexed her fingers. I'm not doing anything to sustain it, not like I was earlier, so I really don't know, said Hand, reached out to smooth over Bella's tangled locks. Being near Chime always made me stronger, which might be why you can all still see me. Peter cleared his throat impatiently. As I was saying, Nans, he stumbled slightly over this word, still clearly not believing his eyes. Right? She won't be anything like, well, a regular newborn. She was a one-of-a-kind human, Jay, and she'll be just as special when she's a vampire. Jasper gazed down at her with the faintest stirring of hope. It had been impossible to fit her into the same box as the other humans he had met on a regular basis, so why should he expect any differently when she was a vampire? And Nan was right. No matter what happened, he and his family would be there to help her. The three vampires whirled around defensively, creating a wall in front of Bella's prone figure, when they heard pounding feet and breaking thicket. Rose, the first to break through, her hair tangled and both sleeves of her leather jacket torn off, darted her eyes frantically around the open space. Bella, she gasped. out just as Emmett burst through behind her, nearly slamming into her back. "Bells," he bellowed, flitting towards the cabin. Peter intercepted him, clamping his hands down hard on Emmett's arms to stop him from throwing him off. He swallowed thickly. "She's gonna be fine, Em." Jasper and Charlotte parted, and Emmett froze as Rose's hands came up to cover her mouth, venom welling up in her eyes. She was kneeling by her seconds later, tracing a gentle hand over the slowly healing bones of her jaw. "Who did this?" she hissed. Jasper looked away and gritted his jaw. "Alice and Edward." Rosie's eyes darkened and her fists clenched. "I'll kill them," she swore vehemently. Jasper's face hardened. "They're already dead." "Good," Rose replied simply, going back to running her hands soothingly over Bella's face. "Emmett?" Peter said as he shook the statue, still figure of Emmett. Emmett swallowed thickly. "She'll be all right?" he whispered. When Peter didn't immediately answer, he turned, his eyes wild, and grabbed his upper arms. "Tell me she'll be all right, God damn it," he demanded, jerking him back and forth. "She'll be fine," Peter managed to choke out in between the vigorous shakes. Emmett collapsed to the ground and cradled his head in his large hands. How did this all go so wrong, he brokenly wondered out loud. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I was wrong about Alice. She wasn't just jealous." "This again?" Nan said exasperatedly. "Look, we can sit around and point fingers at each other all day, or we can agree that we all failed spectacularly and move on to more important things." Rosierne, realizing that she wasn't the only one by Bella's side, and Emmett's head snapped towards the irate woman. "The hell," he sputtered, some of his old fire back in his voice. "Am I seeing this?" "Nan," Rose ventured, hesitantly at the same time, gazing wonderingly at the misty apparition beside her. "Hello, Star," Nan replied, patting her gently on the cheek before turning to Emmett and smiling sweetly. "And yes, Duke, you're seeing this." Emmett collapsed on his backside, befuddled disbelief written all over his face. "I don't know how much more I can take," he muttered, his eyes blinking slowly. The bushes rustled again, and all the vampires tensed. They remained that way, even as Carlisle and Esme hesitantly made their way into the clearing, dirt, leaves, and venom staining their clothes. "She's changing, if that's what you're asking," Jasper replied stiffly. "I could check." Jasper shifted, blocking her from Carlisle's view. "No," all the vampires gathered growled simultaneously. Carlisle nodded. "Very well. I believe all the newborns have been dealt with." He looked around at the loosely gathered group of vampires for confirmation of his declaration, but they all remained silent. He cleared his throat uneasily. "And you caught the woman who started this," he directed towards Jasper. "I did," he said darkly, his gaze flickering minutely towards the entrance to the cabin. Carlisle frowned. "She made it this far, but..." His words trailed off when he caught sight of the pale arm sticking outside the door frame, the dying rays of sunlight glinting off the slim golden bracelet clasped around it. Esme gasped in horror as the couple darted towards the wooden structure. "Alice," Esme bemoaned, crouching beside the beheaded vampire. She looked up at Jasper, who was now standing at her back. "She didn't..." "She did." Her head bowed, and he heard her mutter, "You foolish, foolish girl," under her breath. The question was not asked to anyone specifically, but Jasper knew it was directed towards both of them. "Did you know?" Jasper asked as Emmett and Peter flanked his sides, both fully prepared to help him deal with them if they did. "I swear we didn't," Esme promised, timidly shrinking away from the three vampires. "No, I didn't," Carlisle echoed tonelessly, unable to tear his eyes away from Edward. May I finish this?" He finally looked up at Jasper, privately. "No," Jasper returned stoically. Edward was dead, of that he was certain, but death was a tricky thing when it came to vampires, and they needed to be burnt in order to be absolutely certain. He didn't trust Carlisle not to attempt to fuse Edward back together. "He is my son," he glanced at Alice and seemed to belatedly realize the callousness of his words. "They were my children, and they tried to kill my mate. At that moment their lives were in my hands, and it is my choice on how they shall be dealt with." Carlisle still appeared reluctant to leave, and buried deep in his jumbled emotions, Jasper sensed his desire for retaliation. He knew he'd never do it, though. That was always Carlisle's problem. He was too much of a pacifist to assert authority over anybody, especially his coven. Perhaps if he had attempted to rein in Edward and Alice's behavior, then maybe none of this would have come to fruition. Nan was right. It was pointless to place the blame on one specific person. What had happened to Bella today was, in some ways, everyone's fault. A few snowballs rolling downhill that had quickly turned into an avalanche. It shouldn't have happened like this, but it did. He was just going to have to live with that. He nodded towards Esme, who did her best to pull her husband back outside. As soon as they were a reasonable distance away, Jasper fished his lighter out of his pocket and tossed it towards Peter. Burn the whole goddamn thing to the ground. Yes, Major. As Peter and Charlotte kept a careful eye on the cabin burning brightly in the background, Jasper gathered his mate in his arms, wincing when he felt a burst of pain flare up in her. It was never a good idea to move someone going through the change, but he refused to let it happen out in the middle of the woods. He needed to bring her back somewhere familiar, somewhere she felt comfortable, not the place where she had, for all intents and purposes, died. Carlisle was still there, gazing blankly off into the distance, and despite the fact that Jasper felt no sympathy towards him, he still felt the need to say something. He brought this on himself, Carlisle. He should have known what the outcome would be. "And what of Alice?" he asked snidely. "Alice may have been the instigator to this whole mess, but Edward agreed of his own free will. You knew as well as I did that no one could force either of them to do anything they didn't want to." He saw his jaw tighten. "It sounds as if you were saying I should have seen this coming as well. Were you even at that party? She was his singer, for Christ's sake. I mean, Jesus, Carlisle, did you even try to help him with this?" He had told himself he wouldn't point fingers, especially since this particular part was just as much his fault for not dealing with Edward earlier, but it was so easy to shift the blame, or at least a good chunk of it, onto the vampire who had been caught with his teeth in his mate. He needed to deal with that on his own. Carlisle argued back weakly. It was the only way he could truly master the temptation. And then we moved, and I thought it had been dealt with. I thought he had it under control. "Well, let me ask you this again, Carlisle," he spat caustically, gesturing his head towards the dried rivulets of blood that streaked down Bella's chest and arm. "Was that Edward in control?" Carlisle remained silent, closing his eyes and turning away from the sight. "I will consider any ties we may have left terminated at this point," he finally said. "Carlisle," Esme entreated softly, gripping his upper arm tightly. He ignored her. Jasper felt Rose and Emmett come up behind him and curl a hand around his shoulders, their choice clear. "We have no ties, Carlisle," he said. "We haven't for a long time. You just refused to see it." Just before Carlisle turned to leave, never to be seen by Jasper or the others again, their eyes met for a brief moment, and in that short glance, Jasper knew with absolute certainty that in a few years, Carlisle would attempt to recreate the family he'd once had. Jasper felt sorry for their replacements. Jasper quietly perched on the windowsill and watched as Rose dropped the bloody cloth in the bowl, resting on the bedstand. She nodded towards Charlotte, and together they gently shifted Bella's freshly cleansed body into a loose cotton nightgown, which Rose had to dig deep in her closet to recover, and laid her back down on the bed. "We got it out of her hair as best as we could," Charlotte lamented, tracing her fingers down Bella's slightly dampened hair. Newborns usually went nuts at the scent of blood when they first awoke, even their own, and as tempted as Jasper had been to put her in the tub and thoroughly wash all traces of it from her skin, they couldn't afford to jostle Bella any more than they already had. So a sponge bath was the best they could do. "We'll have to take the chance," he replied, holding steadfastly to the hope that Bella would truly be as different as Nan and Peter claimed she would. Emmett and Peter were currently downstairs, nervously pacing the living room floor, as close as they were to Bella. Jasper refused to let them see her in a state of undress. Charlotte scooped up her underwear and blood-stained tank top off of the floor where she had thrown it. "I'll burn these," she said quietly, and left the room. Rose hovered in the doorway, her hand curling around the frame. "Do you want me to stay, Jas?" He managed a half-hearted smile. "Can't risk it, Rosebud," he replied, using the nickname he hadn't called her in years. "If she's volatile when she wakes up, I'm the only one who can control her." "She won't be," she assured him gently, pulling the door closed behind her. Jasper turned his gaze back towards his mate and stared at her still and silent body. His mate, so vibrant and full of life merely 2 days ago, looked so small and, though he could barely admit it to himself, dead laid out on his dark green sheets. How did this happen? He wondered. How did this go so bad so fast? How... You're doing it again. Jasper jerked slightly. He had spaced out so completely in his self-hatred, he'd forgotten Nan was still in the room with him. Doing what? He asked guiltily. Blaming yourself. I can see it in your eyes. It is Nan shook her head. No, Ranger. It's everyone's fault, and at the same time, no one's. The signs were there, both small and big, and we all ignored them or misinterpreted them. It happens. It happened. He scowled. Not to me, it doesn't. She cocked her head. Good or bad, they were your family, Ranger. I imagine a part of you didn't. She paused. Or possibly even couldn't suspect they'd be capable of this. She drifted closer and gazed down at Bella. Renee was barely a mother to my Chime, cold and indifferent when she should have been loving and kind. But you know, I never gave up on the hope that she'd wake up and realize the error of her ways and become the mother that Chime deserved. So you see, Ranger, it's not entirely impossible to be blinded to the worst when you're too busy trying to see the best. Nan settled herself down on the bed as close to Bella as she could get. What are you doing? Giving her something else to concentrate on, she replied, closing her eyes. Usually I talk to her out loud, so this should be interesting. You're talking to her in her head? She told me about what could possibly happen during the change, so I'm making sure she doesn't forget anything. In her head, he repeated dumbly. One hazel eye peeked open. Yes, she said exasperatedly. And you're interrupting. Sorry, Jasper mumbled petulantly. Nan grinned and began speaking out loud. It was raining buckets the day you were born. Can you believe 18 years and the weather around here is still just as miserable? And your mother, already in labor for 13 hours at that point, was threatening to castrate your father with his badge. With a small grin, Jasper moved over to the bottom of the bed and settled back against the footboard, allowing his troubles to melt away as he immersed himself in his mate's life. She's so beautiful, Nan breathed. The two of them had spent the night and the next day filling in Bella's backstory, trying to include as many small details as they could, and as the sun once again begun its descent, Jasper sensed the signs that the change was nearing its final stages. The changes on the outside, however, were almost complete. Her skin had hardened and lightened until it resembled fine china. Her cheekbones had become more pronounced, her lips fuller and redder, her hair lengthened and thickened, its shade darkening until it was almost burgundy. The shredded marks left on her skin from Edward's bite had vanished completely, but the bite Jasper had given her, the one that signified her change, remained, taking on a faint silvery sheen unnoticeable to any eyes that weren't vampiric. He had heard the bones in her hand and her ribs cracking back into place as they healed earlier, as the skin smoothed out and the discoloration faded until it disappeared completely. Nan turned her eyes away, scandalized as the fabric covering her body, which had been loose before the change, it had belonged to Rose after all, began to cling tighter as Bella's already generous curves grew more prominent. "Is this normal?" she sputtered. Yay! Jasper cleared his throat as his voice cracked on the word. His Belle had been gorgeous before the change, but now she was absolutely breathtaking. That added with the thickening of her peaches and cream scent, now taking on a slightly spiced tinge, was messing with his head. Yes, he tried again. It's considered a kind of glamour, he paused and shifted uncomfortably, to, lure people in. Well, that explains why you're all so ridiculously attractive, Nan muttered thoughtfully. Jasper turned his head away, thankful that he was incapable of blushing. So, does it work even if the person is, and pardon my words, incredibly ugly? Jasper frowned. Well, yeah. He tried to remember if he ever even seen an ugly vampire before. Rough around the edges? Definitely. Disfigured from the handful of vampire wars and skirmishes there had been over the years, that too. But actual full-on ugly? I suppose if you want to get technical, it either betters what you didn't have or improves on what you did have. Nan gave him a critical once-over. You must have been a pretty good-looking boy then. Jasper looked down and rubbed the back of his neck, shrugging uncomfortably. Both of their heads snapped to look at Bella's hand when it jerked suddenly. What's happening? Nan asked frantically. He listened as her heartbeat sped up in its last attempt to fight the inevitable. A few more minutes, and it would stop completely. It's almost time. Nan eased off the bed and backed away a few steps, and Jasper copied her movements. It was never a good idea to crowd a newborn. What can we expect? There's so many potential outcomes to turnings, Jasper explained quickly as he dug through one of the drawers that housed his clothes. My only experience with turnings is during the wars, and almost all of them went badly. In the beginning, I didn't care about the people we turned, he admitted shamefully. But as I neared the end, I started to talk to them, encouraged them to remember something, anything, and it seemed to help. Not much, but some. Does that mean she'll remember? Nan asked, hopefully. Everyone is different, he replied vaguely. Unwilling to admit that, because of the violent way she had been forced into the turn, the chances of her not remembering were much greater. He had seen it 100 times before. It was as if trauma to the body triggered some sort of amnesiac defense mechanism in the brain. But Rosie had remembered enough, as had Emmett, and their last moments had been much more unpleasant. He held on to that hope as he finally located a long-sleeved shirt and tugged it over his head. "What are you doing?" "Hiding my scars. Newborns usually go ballistic when they see them." Many of the new scars he'd received during the wars were usually a result of a newborn seeing his old scars. There were only two reactions newborns ever had to scars, fight or flight, and although wished he didn't have to experience either with his mate, if he had to choose, he preferred flight. He really didn't want to be forced to subdue Bella in any capacity, especially if it required him getting physical if she attacked him. His gift only worked so much on a newborn that was running off the high of their blood, still lingering in their veins. He wouldn't be able to react like he normally did when faced with a newborn domination or death, because all that would do is make her terrified of him. He considered her his equal, not something to be dominated. But even if she ran, it would eventually boil down to this. When he caught her, his only other hope was that the mating instinct, which he had unwilling observed firsthand with Peter and Charlotte during the wars, would overpower everything else. But the house and themselves would still manage to get pretty banged up in the process. He took a brief moment to lament the loss of his furniture and all the knickknacks on them, if it came to that. Bella's heart became a pounding drum, its decibel increasing before the sound cut out so abruptly. Jasper briefly wondered if he'd gone deaf. The entire house fell silent, collectively holding their breath and waiting for Bella to open her eyes. Jasper braced himself as she shifted on the bed, 100 different scenarios, all terrible, flashing through his head. She could forget you, his mind screamed. She could hate you. She might never want to see you again. Jax, a throaty purr colored in shades of her old voice, whispered in the dim room. "What?" he returned, and then immediately wanted to slap himself upside the head for his less than brilliant response. "Where's that authority now?" he mocked. She propped herself up on her hands, her bright ruby eyes immediately zeroing in on him in the corner. "Why are you all the way over there?" He tensed at the playfulness in her voice. "What?" He seemed to be stuck on repeat, his mind unable to comprehend how calm Bella was right now. And it wasn't just her words either. Her posture was relaxed as she spread her fingers out on the bed, and she even broke eye contact, something no newborn would ever do, especially with a vampire of his caliber, long enough to shoot a mystified glance at the fabric beneath her fingers. She looked back up. "I said," she began coyly, "why are you all the way over there?" Don't you dare say what again, Whitlock," she quipped at him teasingly, shooting him a very familiar lopsided grin. All the tension and worry drained out of him as the tease, a word-for-word repetition of what she'd said to him the day he told her his secret, passed her lips. "Belle," he breathed, stumbling to her as she swung her legs around the edge of the bed. He collapsed at her feet and buried his face in her lap. "Belle, Belle, Belle," he whispered brokenly. She felt him shiver as her fingers ran through his hair. "Shh, Jax," she soothed as he shook harder. Watery, golden eyes gazed up at her as if she was a goddess, come to life. "You remember," he whispered with relief. "As if I could forget you." He chuckled thickly and burrowed his face back into her lap, muttering, "She remembers," to himself. Bella cupped his cheeks and tilted his head back up towards her. "I remember everything." She remembered Alice and Edward finally coming to a mutual agreement, allowing Edward his taste and Alice the honor of snapping her neck when he was done. She remembered feeling Edward's teeth clamp onto her neck and the burning pain that came with it, so different from the sensation she'd imagined when she entertained thoughts of Jasper biting her. She remembered her vision dimming as the roar she instinctively knew was Jasper's shook the cabin walls, relief that he was there, warring with the sadness that he had gotten there too late and the anger at knowing he was going to be all alone when she died. She remembered Nan's voice in her head, almost mentally shaking her as she demanded that she hold on. She remembered gathering her last bit of strength to give her consent. She remembered the flames licking at her skin as she burned and her mind delirious in those first few moments, suddenly believing that the last 4 years had been nothing but her 14-year-old self's last dying thoughts, as she laid in her bed as Nan's house went up in flames. And so, for them, for her family, she remembered. She pulled Jasper upwards and captured his lips in a desperate kiss. Because she remembered that meant she remembered how close she had come to never seeing him again, just like she'd feared. The frantic kiss soon became languid, as Bella marveled at how her heightened senses made everything about kissing Jasper. Hell, simply sharing the same space as Jasper, that much better. She had smelled him first, even before she opened her eyes, his chocolate and cinnamon scent now so potent she could practically taste it on her tongue. Her sight had come second, actively ignoring the dust mites she could now see swirling in the air and focusing solely on him. Despite the lack of sunlight, his skin was luminescent, glowing faintly as if he were made of pure moonlight. The effect eventually lessened the longer she stared at him. She suspected that it remained long enough to make her aware she was in the presence of another supernatural being. But the feelings she'd felt at that moment, the same awe she'd had on the first day she'd seen him, remained. His arms were covered in a long-sleeved shirt, which she instinctively knew he did because he was nervous about how she'd react to his scars, but he had left his neck open to her gaze, and she could clearly see the bites that decorated the skin of his throat. Instead of being faint and looking like they blended seamlessly into his skin when she'd viewed them as a human, they were more pronounced, darker silver than the glow she had seen earlier. It was a clear warning to any vampire that looked at them to beware, but Bella only looked at them long enough to note how tragically beautiful they were. And now there was taste as she swirled her tongue in his mouth. "I love you," she hummed, as she broke the kiss and rested her forehead against his. He clutched her tightly, and she smiled against his hair as she realized he no longer had to restrain himself when he held her. "How are you so calm?" he asked when he pulled back. Bella blinked. "I'm sorry, but do you really expect me to know how to answer that? Don't you feel the need to go out and cause destruction and bloodshed?" Bella suggested. She frowned and concentrated on her new body. Other than the slight burn in the back of her throat, only about a step up from the sore throats she remembered when she got sick, she felt, well, pretty much like herself. She met Jasper's concerned golden eyes. "How do I feel to you?" A hint of the naughty smirk that never failed to give her the shivers surfaced on his lips as he squeezed her hips. So many possible answers to that question," he murmured lowly. Bella whimpered as she was overcome with the most powerful, animalistic lust she had ever felt in her life. "Whoa," she panted. "That's definitely new." She felt her hands, against her will, digging tightly into the fabric that covered his shoulders. "A little help here, Jack," she whined as she heard the fabric tear. Her shoulders slumped with relief as she felt calm spread through her. It didn't completely rid her of the lusty feelings, but it did dampen them enough that she could gather her wits about her again. She wasn't completely opposed to the idea of having her way with Jasper, and she suspected he wouldn't mind either, but she could sense the presence of her vampire family and didn't really want to start anything while they were downstairs. Worried about her, Jasper grinned sheepishly. "Sorry about that, darling. I should have known better than to tease you like that. Your emotions are going to be a bit more heightened than usual in the first couple of months." Jasper's smile softened as he reached up his hand to curl around her cheek. She mimicked the gesture on his own cheek as the two stared at each other silently, as if seeing each other for the first time, though, she supposed, in many ways, they were. "Chime?" a voice entreated softly. Bella's eyes snapped up when she heard Nan call her name. "Nah," she gasped, tearfully, lurching from the bed and into her arms. "I heard you," she babbled. "I heard you talking to me. You helped me remember." She held her tightly and huffed out a shaky laugh when Nan began humming Silver Bells. "Anyone ever tell you that you're just as bad as Emmett and Peter at ruining moments?" Jasper asked teasingly behind her. Bella frowned and opened her mouth to protest. "My granddaughter almost died, young man. I think that merits me a little of her attention." Bella's eyebrows shot up as she darted her gaze between Nan and Jasper. Are you talking to her?" Jasper nodded. "I'm looking at her too." "How is that possible?" Jasper chuckled wryly. "We've been asking that question a lot in the last 24 hours. Someone needed to get Ranger, or it would have been too late," Nan explained simply. Bella finally looked at Nan and realized that she looked more transparent than she had ever remembered seeing her. "Nan," she asked fretfully, raising a hand to her pale cheek. "Are you all right?" Nan's answering smile was beautiful, but sad. "I'm fine, Chan," she said, patting her hand lightly. "Everything will be just fine." Bella frowned at the strange words, but was distracted by the voices she could suddenly hear arguing on the other side of the door. "Why can't I see her?" Emmett protested. "She's been awake for over a half hour." "You gotta give her time to adjust," Peter replied sternly. I haven't heard anything break yet, Emmett shot back. No screaming, no fighting, he added. It sounds like she's pretty adjusted to me. He's got a point, Pete, Charlotte said. You spent the last 24 hours blathering about how different Bella would be. You're supposed to be on my side, Chair, Peter whined. Bella turned puppy dog eyes to her mate. Can we tell them to come in? He frowned and crossed the room to stand in front of her. Are you sure? It's all right if you want to wait. I told you I feel calm, in control. She tilted her head. Don't I? He shook his head in disbelief. Yeah, you do, darling. I really shouldn't be surprised, though. You confused the hell out of me quite a bit when you were human, too. Just can't do things normal, can you? He teased. She pushed his shoulder and stuck out her tongue. He stared at her assessingly before nodding. Come in, he called out over his shoulder. Slowly. Jessie, she whined. Just taking precautions, Belle. She pouted but remained silent, allowing him to take a defensive stance in front of her. Are you protecting them or me? She muttered petulantly. He ignored her, and she watched as he braced his feet on the floor as the door creaked open. She wasn't surprised when it was Peter's dark head that peeked through the door first, having the most experiences with dealing with newborns. Charlotte followed behind him, shooting a tentative smile at Bella over Peter's shoulder. Peaches, Peter greeted stoically as he gave her the same assessing stare Jasper had moments earlier. Pumpkin, she returned just as blandly. He seemed shocked by the nickname, if the widening of his ruby eyes was anything to go by. You remember that? That and your penchant for wearing woman's clothing, she replied with a cheeky grin. Of all the things you could have remembered, he muttered. There was an impatient huff behind them. Get out of the way, Emmett said, pushing Peter and Charlotte to the side. Baby sis, he exclaimed happily when he caught sight of her. Dig, bro, Bella squealed, dashing around Jasper and evading his reaching hands, as she made a beeline towards Emmett. She was impeded by Rose, who was suddenly in front of her mate, her hands curled and a warning growl on her lips. Bella stopped with a loud sigh. This is really getting old, she complained. In control, Bella here, she promised, crossing her finger over her unbeating heart. Rose slowly relaxed her protective stance. Sorry, Bells. Instincts. I think I'm still a little on edge. It's okay, Bella replied softly. But now that you're front and center, she made a come-here motion with her outstretched hands. Rose hesitated long enough that Bella sadly wondered if they were always going to be this nervous around her before she walked into her arms. Rose traced her fingers down a strand of hair that framed the left side of her face. You're beautiful, she murmured affectionately. I knew you would be. She dropped her hands to her shoulders and pulled her into a hug. I'm so glad you're all right. I promise I won't regret this, Bella whispered back, answering Rose's unspoken concern. She released a surprised oof when Emmett suddenly wrapped his large arms around the both of them and lifted them up enough that their feet lost contact with the floor. Bells, he said, his voice slightly choked. Bella maneuvered her arms around him as best she could and gave him a reassuring squeeze. When he finally released her, Peter and Charlotte moved forward to give her less enthusiastic, but just as heartfelt hugs. You really are in control, Peter noted when he pulled back. I've never met a newborn who could be touched so freely so soon after waking. He shot a look at Jasper. Other than their mate, that is? Bella frowned, with everyone pointing out how different she was. She was starting to become a little self-conscious. You're making me feel a little defective, she said, laughing uneasily. No, Peter quickly backtracked. That's not what I'm saying at all. I knew it would be like this. Just seeing it in action is a little... He shook his head. I'm actually a little jealous. According to Jay, I was a bit of a snarling, drooling mess in the first few hours. As opposed to the mess you are now, Jasper quipped. Peter scowled and flipped him the finger. I attacked Peter when I woke, Charlotte added helpfully. Her lips curled into a wicked grin. Tried to rip his clothes off. Rose laughed. Emmett tried the exact same thing. Emmett grinned and shrugged unapologetically. She was the hottest woman I had ever seen. Paper beats rock, Peter supplied with a nod. Charlotte rolled her eyes, or, in less vague terms, mating instinct supersedes everything else. Bella shifted guiltily and looked away as she remembered how she had reacted to Jasper earlier. Not so different after all. I guess, she muttered embarrassingly. Just wait, Peter said, rubbing his hands together giddily. Sex when you were vampires the most? Peter or Jasper cut in, clearing his throat uneasily. Bella grinned sheepishly when she realized Jasper probably felt her renewed lust at the mention of sex. Oh yeah, Peter continued unashamedly. You're gonna have to clear your schedule for an entire... Peter, Jasper barked. They all laughed. Nan smiled softly as she watched her granddaughter and her vampire family interact. She had known earlier that Ranger was leaving something out when he addressed Chime's changing, and as much as she had tried to remain positive, she'd been very aware that there had been a very real possibility that the Chime she knew and loved could have been gone. It would have been the bitter icing on top of this mess of a cake. Watching her now, she was glad to see her fears were unfounded. She was different. Yes, mostly in appearance. Holy hell, she heard Chime whisper as she checked herself out in the mirror. Rosette supplied, and the newly confident way she held herself. But the things that made her special, the things that made her Bella Swan, the warmth, the humor, that endearing touch of awkwardness, remained. That knowledge was the final piece of the puzzle to her journey. She knew it was time for Chime to start a new one, without her. She felt a warmth at her back and the pleasant scent of butterscotch in the air. There was a brush of a touch against her neck, followed by a low whisper in her ear. It's time to come home, sunshine. Jasper's eyebrows creased in confusion at the new scent in the air. Do you smell that? He noticed that Bella had lowered the small mirror and also had her nose tilted upwards. It smells almost like butterscotch, she replied hesitantly. And something else, Peter added, like he frowned in confusion. Something I've never smelt before. Jasper nodded in agreement. He had never smelt this particular scent before either. If he had to attempt to put a name to it, it would almost be like peace had been given a scent. A faint glow suddenly lit up the dim room, growing brighter with each passing second, and Jasper turned his gaze upwards towards the light attached to the ceiling, wondering if someone had suddenly turned it on. Nan, he heard Bella whisper. The group collectively turned towards the corner, where Nan stood, her form lit up by the warm, misty light that was forming behind her. She looked younger than she had in the field, her color and vitality restored, as the light seeped into her and caused her to glow from within. He blinked, and for a moment he saw a visage of the woman he had seen in the alley that day, almost a twin, albeit a slightly older one, to his beautiful mate. He blinked again, and she was back to her grandmotherly appearance. He and all the other vampires in the room, aside from Bella, took an uneasy step back from the light and what it undoubtedly represented. He could sense their emotions, a mixture of fear, confusion, and a hidden shame of what they were, which practically mirrored his own. This was a light he and his kind would probably never see. And with a heavy heart, he realized that Bella would never see it either, now that she was one of them. He watched as his mate took a hesitant step towards Nan. Nan, Bella repeated tremulously. What's going on? The light grew brighter as she stared. It didn't hurt her eyes, though. If anything, it was soothing, wrapping her cool body in a warm embrace, not unlike the comfort she found in her Nan's arms. The drained, transparent look that her Nan had sported ever since she awoke disappeared, replaced by the same woman that had been by her side since she was a little girl. She was slightly different, younger, and more happy than she ever remembered seeing her. The flower-printed dress she'd been wearing had been replaced by another dress, this time a pale buttercream with lacy accents. It was plain but pretty, and Bella had a vague recollection of seeing this once before, stored away in Nan's closet. Its colors had been faded by then, but it was undoubtedly the same dress, the dress she had gotten married in. The smile that graced Nan's face was as bright as the light behind her. It's time, sweetheart, she whispered gently. You have your vampire family to protect you now? I must go. She looked over her shoulder towards the light and smiled. I hear my will calling me. Bella flitted to her and clung tightly to her waist. I'm not ready to let you go, she cried. Yes, you are, Nan murmured softly, running a hand through her hair. You have been for quite some time. Bella couldn't argue with that. She had known for a while that her time with her Nan was quickly drawing to a close and had been quietly preparing herself for this exact moment. But now that it was here, she couldn't help but wish she had a little bit longer. She allowed Nan to pull away from her and watched silently as she went to each of her vampire's side and embraced them, whispering her goodbyes softly in each of their ears. Nan saved him for last, and he felt her warm breath on his ear as she whispered, Goodbye, Ranger. Jasper pressed a kiss to her soft cheek. Thank you, he whispered back, for everything. He owed her for so much more than just saving Bella's life and helping her remember. He owed her for shaping her into the amazing woman that she was, and for getting his mate to even take a chance on him in the first place. Who knows how differently things would have turned out if Nan hadn't been in her life. Isn't that my line? Nan laughed softly. She leaned back and patted him gently on the cheek. You'll take care of her. It wasn't a question so much as it was an order. Forever, Jasper swore. Finished with the goodbyes, Nan drifted back to Bella's side. Will I ever see you again? Bella asked tearfully. Perhaps, Nan replied with a small smile. But don't worry about that. Now is the time to live, to laugh and to love, to experience all the pleasures life has to offer you. All the pleasures? Emmett interjected with a waggle of his eyebrows. If you must, Duke, she said, grinning cheekily at him over her shoulder. But remember, the light and her form started to fade. I'll be watching. Bella stared at the space Nan had once occupied. Gone forever. Her breath hitched at the thought. She felt Jasper at her back as his hand reached out to tentatively curl over her shoulder, silently lending her his strength. She smiled slightly at the touch, and the ache of sadness tapered into wistful melancholy. I'll miss her, she murmured. I think we all will, Jasper replied, and she could hear a sadness that almost rivaled her own in his voice. She turned and cupped his cheeks, frowning at the misery in his eyes. Why are you so sad, Jas? Heaven, he whispered. I don't know if vampires are even offered that precious gift. As Jasper pulled him back towards him, she felt the others close in behind her and sighed. She had told Ned a long time ago that her life was going to change, and no matter what happened, it was definitely for the better. I'm getting married. It was at least the 20th time today that thought went through her head, and Bella wasn't sure if she was any closer to believing it was true. She tilted her left hand back and forth, allowing the modest emerald of the engagement ring on her finger to catch the light overhead and glint pleasantly, as if sending a Morse code that said, yes, this is really happening, to the shy, weird little girl that was still hidden deep within her. She hummed the wedding march to herself as she continued the motion, giggling as the tune soon transformed into the happy birthday song. It had been her idea to get married on her birthday, as sort of a way to officially say goodbye to her old life and hello to her new one. Peter thought it was just a cleverly lazy way to never forget their wedding anniversary. She had stuck her tongue out and reminded him that, thanks to her vampirism, she'd never forget anything. Suddenly, the I'm getting married thought was swiftly overtaken by the more familiar, I'm really a vampire thought. You'd think after almost 4 months I'd be used to it, she thought, as she stopped tilting her hand and studied the pale marble skin. But from time to time, she still had to remind herself that she wasn't human anymore, mainly because she really didn't feel that different. The adjustment had been easier than she or any of the others had thought. She'd had no trouble sticking to the animal diet, even wrinkling her nose in distaste the one time that she had accidentally scented human blood. She had gained control quite nicely over her newfound strength, only destroying one end table, a door, and the couch in the process, and agility, quickly using both to completely own Peter and Emmett during a mock battle. The battle she'd had with Jasper after everyone left had ended quite differently and allowed her to truly enjoy the strength and stamina that came with being a vampire. She grinned widely as a pleasant shiver of remembrance racked her body. Peter hadn't been kidding about vampire sex, she thought, with a laugh. Her smile faded slightly as the walk down memory lane brought back the memories of her first few weeks after her turning. No, she sighed. It certainly hadn't been all fun and games. The early change had unfortunately thrown several wrenches into the very careful plans Jasper had made surrounding her turning. There had still been 3 weeks left in her final year, and her blissfully unaware dad was on his way back from California at that very moment. It hadn't been easy. Obviously, Charlie had been the hardest to deal with. As tempted as she was to tell him everything, her vampires had been hesitant, and Jasper had pointed out that him simply knowing their true nature could put him in danger. Not from anyone specifically, but there were some vampires out there who didn't appreciate the Cullens and, by association, his, Rose and Emmett's, method of mixing themselves in with the human populace. Keep to your own kind was the motto of those types of vampires, and humans had been hurt over things like this in the past. In the end, Bella simply couldn't take the chance. So, when he called her after he got home, she had put on her best sick voice and launched into some long rambling, or as she convinced herself, fever-induced spiel about how contagious she was. It had been backed up with a nifty and completely forged note from Dr. Cullen. Rose really had that ineligible doctor scrawl down pat, hand delivered by Jasper, who assured Charlie that they were all vaccinated. Added with Bella's scratchy, "You're the sheriff, Dad, you can't possibly afford to get sick," and it had been enough to convince him to work out a plan with the school where she would do all of her work, including her finals, at home. Well, Jasper's home. It had been hard lying to him for those 3 weeks and turning down every attempt he made to come visit her. If Bella had been capable of keeling over with stress and guilt by the end of it, she probably would have. Jasper had done the best he could to distract her by putting her through what she, not so affectionately, called newborn boot camp, making sure she was really as stable as she repeatedly claimed she was. Finally, at the end of those 3 weeks, and Jasper absolutely certain her thirst was under control, the day before her high school graduation, Bella, brown contacts firmly in place, saw her dad for the first time since her change. People used to mock her for her pale skin, especially in sunny place like Phoenix, but at least now it would work in her favor. Before she had gone, Charlotte, an absolute genius with a makeup brush in her hand, had dusted her cheeks with a bit of makeup, just enough to give her a human-like glow. She had pulled her hair up into a sloppy bun to hide the new length. The darkened color she could do nothing about, though, so if he asked, hair dye would be blamed, and put on her baggiest clothes to hide her new figure. All in all, she thought she looked pretty convincing. She wasn't so sure when she finally walked through the door, though. The thirst that had worried Jasper enough to accompany her was non-existent, just like she'd said, and she shot him an "I told you so" look, as she smiled in relief. But Charlie had stared at her the minute she walked into the kitchen. "What?" Bella asked, shifting uncomfortably and squeezing Jasper's hand tightly. "You look different," he replied gruffly, shifting his gaze from her head to her feet and back again. "Do I?" she tittered nervously. He grunted, and his eyes darkened. She felt Jasper take a step back and knew that whatever he was feeling from him, it wasn't good. "I'm gonna ask you this once," he said stiffly, "and you're going to tell me the truth." Bella gulped and nodded. "Are you pregnant?" "What?" she burst out, unsure if wanted to laugh hysterically or sob in relief. "You heard me." "No!" she managed before the laughter she'd been holding on to suddenly escaped. Of all the things you could have asked, she could understand why he'd make the connections: sudden sickness, baggy clothes, the united front her and Jasper presented when the walk through the door. Talk about misreading the signals, though, she chuckled again. God, I wish Nan had been here to see this, she thought wistfully. Once he had overcome his embarrassment at jumping to conclusions, she was able to misdirect him by asking for details about his trip. He had presented her with a new charm, a bad shape of all things, clearing his throat as he did so. "For your bracelet," he explained as she fingered the small silver shape. "Found it in a small jewelry shop Iris insisted on going into. I wasn't sure if you'd want the constant reminder of your old dad hanging from your wrist. But it's great," Bella insisted, unclasping her bracelet, which she was incredibly grateful had survived the whole mess, and clipping the charm to it. She reached out to give Charlie a quick hug, pulling back just in time to see the tail end of an unidentifiable emotion cross his face. The rest of the night had been spent talking about his trip. The next day was her graduation, and as if the fates were in her favor, there had been a thunderstorm, and the whole event had been moved inside. Bella had been grateful that the same obliviousness that people directed towards the Cullens applied to her as well, and her paler-than-usual skin was chalked up to her recent battle with illness. Her diploma had been in her hands for barely 2 minutes before Jasper and Emmett were regaling Charlie with a trip they had planned. Bella included, of course. Jasper had complete faith in her, but even she conceded that she still needed a bit more time to fully come to terms with her vampirism, especially after how stressful the last few weeks were, if they had his permission. He had smiled at her and nodded, reminding Jasper and Emmett that he planned to take his vacation in August and was holding them to their promise. They would hold true to that, arriving at night during the last 2 days of Charlie's vacation. It hadn't been easy, not with the bright sunny days, but they had managed by always being the first ones out, basking in the shade of the largest trees and ridiculously floppy hats on their heads. And the last ones to leave. They had copped out of taking the boat on the river by Emmett's calm explanation of suffering from aquaphobia. She would congratulate him later for not only pronouncing it correctly, but managing to say it with a straight face. Their last night there, all of them lounging and laughing around a crackling campfire. Jasper, with a stern-faced Charlie, who had suddenly gone silent in the background, had got down on bended knee and presented her with a beautiful ring. The hope and love in his eyes in that moment managed to outshine the sparkling emerald at the center of the intricate infinity knots. "Marry me, Belle," he whispered. She had looked up long enough to see the small tilt of her father's lips and his almost unconscious nod of approval before flinging herself in his arms with a loudly squealed, "Yes, it's a nice day for a white wedding." Bella was pulled from her thoughts as the loudly sung lyrics drifted up through the partially cracked window. She eased off the bed and made her way towards the window, grinning as the singing continued. An unseasonably warm September breeze gently ruffled the silken fabric she wore as she glanced down towards the backyard. The grin turned into a laugh as a singing Peter wrapped his arms around a preoccupied Charlotte and began grinding up against her. "Get off me, you lug," she hissed, batting him away and running a hand down the pretty dove-gray dress she wore in an attempt to smooth out the wrinkles Peter's attention had caused. "I gotta make sure everything's ready." Her eyes narrowed as they darted around the yard, and Bella could tell she was fighting the urge to inject a little vampire speed into finishing up whatever last-minute tasks she thought she had. "Everything looks perfect, babe," he assured her. Bella found herself nodding in agreement. It really did look perfect. Better than perfect if it was possible. The backyard had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. It was the early hours of twilight, Bella's favorite time, the sky a beautiful periwinkle color with a mere trace of the setting sun in a distant horizon, and fairy lights and Chinese lanterns were strung from and around the trees that surrounded the area. The few white chairs that were set out were angled towards a conveniently placed tree that had one large branch jutting out from which another lantern hung, creating the perfect place to get married under, nature's own bridal arch. Candles dotted the aisle between the chairs, safely ensconced in glass candle holders that were high enough to protect from any potential gust of wind. And those, added with the fairy lights and the lanterns, cast the whole area in a warm glow. She was thankful once again for the tail end of an almost unheard of Indian summer, in these parts at least, that made the air that should have been cool at this point almost balmy. Charlie had been curious, but not particularly bothered, by Bella's decision to have not only a night wedding, but a night wedding outside, but he might have sang a different tune if he and Iris were forced to shiver outside, while the others remained unaffected. It's not that she was against being married in a church. She really didn't care either way. She would have happily married Jasper in a dump, but knew that religion, for many different reasons, made her vampires uncomfortable. Peter shrugged and danced over to the woman perched comfortably on one of the 5 chairs that were arranged on the lawn. "Feel like dancing, Iris," Peter cajoled. The blonde woman looked up in the direction of his voice. "I think dancing is supposed to happen after the wedding," she pointed out, wryly. Peter chuckled. "We're all about breaking tradition in this family." The older woman hummed and held down the knee-length hem of the peach dress she wore when a breeze caught it. "Somehow, I don't doubt it." Bella tilted her head curiously. In the last few months, her father and Iris had grown closer, eventually getting to know Bella's second family in the process, and sometimes she said things that made Bella wonder if she knew more than she was letting on. Despite being a blind woman, Iris was very smart and perceptive. As if sensing her thoughts, Peter looked up towards the window and gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, his lips quirking in amusement as if to say, "You're not thinking that again, are you?" He'd already made it clear that Iris just considered them to be a bit, well, odd. Which really wasn't surprising. The others had gotten to know her out of respect for Charlie, but for obvious reasons, kept her at a personal distance. She didn't seem to mind, though, taking it all in stride with a casualness that solidified Bella's belief that she was perfect for her father. Even though they hadn't been together that long, Bella had the feeling that marriage was definitely on the horizon. She leaned her forehead against the glass as a somber smile touched her lips. At least he'd have someone to take care of him. She honestly didn't know what was going to happen after this. Jasper had told her that they had at least a good 10 years before he would start to get suspicious that she wasn't aging. But after that, well, the Cullens had moved around so much for a reason. She sighed sadly and pushed her hands against the glass as she began to remind herself of everything she had and would gain. Not the things she'd lose. Her eyes once again were drawn to her engagement ring. He's worth it, she thought, with a small smile. He's worth everything. Her attention was drawn away from the window when she felt the fabric surrounding her legs shift and begin to rise. Looking down, she laughed when she saw the dark black head peek out, the pale buttercream fabric of her dress framing their head as golden eyes gazed up at her. "Jat!" she chastised playfully. Jasper had told her once that his gift had manifested itself within hours of him waking up. So when, after the first few weeks, nothing extra made itself known, Bella had come to the conclusion that, like Rose, Emmett, and Char, she simply didn't have one. She'd been a bit disappointed in the beginning, feeling a touch inadequate next to her gifted mate, though she'd never tell him that, but had eventually shrugged it off, telling herself that super strength, speed, and immortality were still pretty awesome. It wasn't until exactly a month and a half after she'd been turned that her gift had announced its presence in, like most of her life, for the last 8 years. A pretty unconventional way. They had been at a small villa on the coast of Spain, and Jasper had walked into the kitchen to see Bella chatting, quite happily, to the kindly old maid, Rita. Belle, Jasper had said hesitantly when she told him this, staring quizzically at the empty space beside her. We don't have a maid. She had been suitably freaked when she realized the fear that she'd had with Nan about seeing other ghosts had manifested itself. She didn't cope with it very well in the beginning, finally demanding to be brought home and locking herself in their bedroom. Even after a week of pleading and assurances that her gift wasn't that bad, Bella still refused to come out. She was ashamed to admit that for that first week she had cursed out Nan, blaming her for inadvertently having a hand in this. It wasn't until she felt a cool, sandy tongue licking at her face and opened her eyes to stare into a familiar and much-missed pair of golden eyes that she finally began to see her gift for the true, gift it was. It really wasn't as bad as it could have been, Bella decided as she scratched behind Jet's ears. She didn't see them all Sixth Sense style, with gaping wounds in their heads or slit marks on their arms, but how they were when they were alive. Nor did they flock to her and ask her do things for her. In fact, most were pleasantly surprised at the realization that Bella could see and talk to them. Most of them had died peacefully and were all quite aware of the fact that they were dead and simply weren't quite ready to move on for one reason or another. Usually they were watching over someone special, like Nan had done for her, or in Rita's case, was waiting for her husband, Eduardo, to pass on so Heaven wouldn't be lonely. She had really only seen a few since Rita, including her lips curled into a fond smile. A grumpy old man named Ben during her time at the cabin. She thought he was another camper at first until the moment she had greeted him and he stared at her as if she had two heads. He had looked over his shoulder before turning to her in surprise and gruffly asking, "You talking to me?" He had been even more shocked when the German shepherd, that same silvery glow emanating from its fur that sat faithfully by his side, came to Bella and nuzzled himself into her hand. It had taken a good 10 minutes to convince him that, yes, she could see him and that no, she wasn't dead. Technically, before he finally let her engage him in a somewhat civil conversation. "How is it you can see me?" She shrugged uneasily. "It's kind of difficult to explain." "You ain't human, are you?" Bella tensed. "What do you mean?" A match was struck next before the sweet scent of cherry tobacco drifted in the air around them. "I'm a ghost, kid," he said as he puffed on the pipe. "I may not pay much attention to the people that are occasionally around me, but I can see the difference." "No, you're not," he agreed as he stared at her thoughtfully. "It's the damnedest thing, but it's almost like you're straddling the fence." He pulled off his battered fishing hat and ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "You an angel?" he asked, after a few minutes. "Here to finally convince me it's time to take a trip to that place in the sky." Bella snorted. "Hardly." He smirked and put the hat back on his head. "Good, 'cause you have your work cut out for you." "Me? Nah. Never married, no kids. The few friends I have are still alive and kicking. Ain't got nobody waiting for me on the other side of those pearly gates." "Your parents?" He shrugged. "Wouldn't even recognize them if I saw them. Raised in foster care till I was 18. He gazed affectionately at the dog that was shaking the water off his fur. "No, Saucil is the only family I've ever had. And this cabin," he added, jerking a quick nod backwards. "This lake, well, this is my heaven right here." Bella smiled softly as she gave one last pat to Jet's head, allowing Ben's remembered words to soothe the worries she had about the future. It echoed almost exactly what she said to Jasper the night after her turning, and she believed in her words as much now as she had then. "Knock, knock." Bella lifted her head towards the door. "Come in," she called. She grinned as Rose's head peeked around the partially open door, her golden locks artfully styled into a fishtail braid and draped over her left shoulder, the tip of it just brushing the dipped collar of the pale lavender dress she wore. She pushed her way through the door, a bouquet clutched in one hand and a thin square box wrapped in sparkly jade paper in the other, and nudged it shut with the heel of her matching lavender heels. Jet gave a playful yip at the sight of Rose and, with one last lick to Bella's cheek, streaked through Rose's partially spread legs and vanished right through the still closed door. Rose, tracking the movement with her eyes, shook her head with a small laugh. "I don't think I'll ever get used to that," she muttered. Bella chuckled as she stood. This had been another angle to her gift, which had been brought about by the occasional discussion on why they had all been able to see Nan. Jasper seemed to be under the impression that the light that had appeared that night, and her being so close to the end, had something to do with the others seeing her as well. But Peter had a different theory. He had proposed that the venom from Edward had already entered Bella's system, enough to slowly begin the change, and that their ability to see Nan had been Bella's doing, a mere taste of the gift she'd eventually have. Unfortunately, this one was a bit harder to grasp. Jasper speculated it was more of an unconscious thing, and that it may require her to have an emotional bond to whatever ghost she was seeing. Telling her that he was able to sense and manipulate his family's emotions easier than he could anyone else's. Other than doing it with Jet, proving Jasper's point, and shocking the hell out of him and the others in the process, she knew it was a side of her gift she wouldn't be able to use often, if at all. She didn't know if she'd ever feel the emotional connection she'd had with her name with anyone else. Rose turned back as Bella finished standing, the smile on her face softening. "You look beautiful," she said softly. Bella smiled shyly. "All thanks to you." Rose shook her head. "No, I just made the dress. You're the one that makes it beautiful." Bella beamed at Rose and turned towards the full-length mirror. Normally she'd be shifting self-consciously at the compliment, but in the pale buttercream fabric she couldn't deny how beautiful she felt. She had chosen the color specifically to match the dress Nan had been wearing the last time she saw her, so that, at least in a small way, she could feel as if Nan was there with her. The style had been updated to something a little more modern and a tad more intricate, but still had a romantic, old-fashioned feel to it, thanks to the lace cap sleeves and the way it gathered in at her waist before cascading down to the floor into a lacy but manageable train of fabric behind her. The neckline started at her shoulders, before sweeping down into a modest V shape, low enough that you could see the silver bell charms that dangled at the end of her necklace. It was the only jewelry she wore other than the bracelets around her ankle and wrist. She smiled slightly as she caught sight of the two newest charms, a small silver pumpkin and a heart-shaped ruby, a birthday present from Peter and Char, as she realized that now every member of her family was properly represented. All that was left now was the veil, yet another gift from Rose. It was the same one she had worn when she married Emmett, and she had given it to Bella so she could fulfill both something old and something borrowed tradition. Because it was such a small affair, Bella had forgone almost all of the normal wedding staples, wanting something simple instead. But because Rose had insisted, "For luck," she said, Bella had agreed. The something new was her dress, obviously, and the something blue, well, only Jasper would see that. Reason number 35. Why, it's great to be a vampire, Bella thought as she reached for the veil. No more uncontrollable blushing. Rose ears-at the bouquet and present on the dresser beside her, and moved towards Bella. "Here, let me," she murmured, taking it from her, and moving behind Bella. Clipping the veil to the back of her head, she arranged the diaphanous fabric so that it cascaded over Bella's loose curls and down her back. She leaned forward and hooked her chin over Bella's bare shoulder. "Perfect," she proclaimed softly, wrapping her hands around Bella's waist and squeezing gently. "Thank you," Rose continued in the same soft tone. "For what?" "For everything you've done for Jasper. For this family." She stepped around Bella, blocking her view in the mirror, and reached up to gently touch her cheek. "For the first time in a long time, I'm actually looking forward to the future." Venom misted Bella's eyes as a beautiful smile stretched her lips. "I love you, sis," she whispered. Rose pulled her into a hug. "I love you too, Bells," she said, her voice breaking slightly on the reply. After a long moment, they pulled back with a chuckle. "Another perk of being a vamp," Rose quipped as she eyed Bella's face. "No tears to mess up Char's beautiful makeup job, although," she added, leaning closer and studying Bella's colored contacts, "I'd try to control the teary moments, or those brown eyes will be gold before the end of the ceremony." As Rose stepped out of the way, moved towards the dresser, Bella leaned forward until her nose was almost touching the reflective surface of the mirror to ensure that her contacts hadn't started disintegrating. As much as she loved her ochre eyes, they would be damn near impossible to explain to her father, especially when 3 other people had the exact same color. Charlotte and Peter had been forced to join the fun as well, as accepting as people seemed to be of the strangeness that was gold eyes, red eyes, on any other day besides Halloween, sent their alarms through the roof. Charlotte had gamely stuck a pair of the darkest blue contacts she could get in her eyes, but Peter had to be talked, or in other words threatened by Jasper, out of telling Charlie he was an albino before he caved, and agreed to wear them. "They're fine," Rose insisted as Bella poked lightly at her eye. "I was just teasing you. Those babies are ram tough." "Let me guess," Bella said wryly. "A vampire made them?" "Of course," Rose replied simply as if the answer was obvious. Bella laughed and rolled her eyes. "Now," Rose said, closing her hand around the brightly wrapped gift she had sat on the dresser earlier and jiggling it at Bella. "Happy birthday," she said, passing the gift to her. Gingerly tearing open the wrapping paper, Bella coughed lightly in embarrassment when she saw its contents. "From Char and me," Rose said, grinning wickedly as Bella held up the scraps of silk and lace that comprised a very scandalous teddy for the wedding night. She waggled her eyebrows suggestively, looking very much like her mischievous mate in that moment, though, she continued cheekily, tapping her chin in mock thought, "This is probably more of a present for Jasper than you." Thanks," Bella muttered, shoving the fabric back in the box as Rose laughed. "Is Emmett all set?" she asked, attempting to change the subject. Rose grinned. "Are you kidding? He's been preparing himself for this for the last few days." She crept over to the door and cracked it open a bit, holding her finger to her mouth in a hushing motion. "So listen." Moving closer to the door, Bella could just make up the low squeak of Emmett's shoes as he paced the floor, muttering to himself. The pacing stopped and she heard him say, "No, that doesn't sound right," followed by the scritch sound of a pen on paper. She was proud at how seriously her normally goofy big brother was taking this. He had been surprisingly shy and humble when he asked for permission to officiate, and Bella and Jasper had been all too happy to agree. Rose closed the door and leaned against it with a sigh. "He wouldn't even let me see what he's writing," she said with a pout. "As long as it doesn't start with, 'There once was a man from Nantucket,' we're good." Rose laughed. "Yeah, that's proof right there that Peter should never, ever be allowed to officiate a wedding. It was bad enough that he was in charge of Jasper's bachelor party." "Oh, don't worry," Rose said with a solemn nod. "Emmett already assured me that there were only 2 naked strippers there." "What?" Bella snarled. Rose snickered. "You are too easy." "Don't tease the bride," Bella muttered sourly. She shifted uneasily on her feet. How is Jasper, anyways?" "A bundle of nerves," Rose laughed. "I never thought I'd ever use the word giddy to describe Jazz, but..." She trailed off with a shrug and a chuckle. Bella breathed a sigh of relief, glad to hear that he was just as worked up as she was. Not that she had expected him not to jilt her at the altar or anything like that, but, well, Nan always used to say that she worried too much. Rose rolled her eyes. "Please tell me you weren't just entertaining thoughts of him leaving you at the altar." Bella shifted her eyes away guiltily. I plead the fifth?" Rose sighed and shook her head. "I was a mess on my wedding day, considering what happened the last time I put on a wedding dress." She grimaced at the memory. "So I'm gonna let that one slide." She made a move towards the bouquet, and just for the record, Jasper would have married you the second after he met you if he thought you'd agree to it. Bella thought back to the first time she had officially met him in the bookstore and the mess of the emotions she'd had. "I might have needed a little convincing at that point," she replied with a laugh. Rosie's hand closed around the tightly wrapped stems. "I'm sorry we couldn't get the flowers you wanted," she said as she passed the bouquet to Bella. "It's all right," Bella replied as she traced a finger along the pale petal of a lily. She had hoped to have sunflowers in her arrangement, but neither the small flower shop in Forks nor the 3 in Port Angeles carried them, one even snidely commenting that sunflowers weren't really a normal request. Not wanting to make a big deal out of it, Bella had brushed off everyone's offers to track some down and settled for a simple arrangement of lilies, goldenrods, and baby's breath, and was quite satisfied with the final product. Besides, Nan had loved goldenrods almost as much as she loved sunflowers. Bella's nostrils tingled with the comforting scent of sandalwood seconds before there was another knock at the door. "Bella?" A gruff voice questioned hesitantly. "Come in, Dad," Bella called out. Charlie, looking incredibly handsome in a dark black suit, his peach tie a perfect match to Iris's ensemble, stepped through the door and promptly froze when he caught sight of Bella. I'll just give you 2 a minute," Rose said quietly, squeezing Charlie's upper arm as she passed by him and snapping him out of his stupor. Bella, he tried again, his voice slightly choked. You look beautiful. Bella smiled shyly. Thanks, Dad. He cleared his throat in embarrassment and stuffed his hands in his pants pockets. Nervous? He asked. Bella thought for a moment, assessing her feelings. Surprisingly, no. It's okay, Bella assured him. In all honesty, she had invited Renee simply because she felt like she had to. While she was heartbroken at the thought of eventually having to cut ties with her dad, she was rather indifferent when it came to Renee. She had been telling the truth when she told Jasper she remembered everything about her human life, but for some reason the memories involving Renee were fuzzy, like she experienced them from the sidelines. She knew the indifference she felt towards Renee should bother her, but whenever she thought about it, it simply didn't. Renee hadn't even been the one to tell her that she wasn't coming. She had gotten poor Phil to stammer some excuse out over the phone. Bella had told him to tell her to have a good life. Do you really want a repeat of last Thanksgiving? Bella asked sarcastically. His lips tilted upwards. That was pretty bad, wasn't it? She nodded. I have you here, Dad. That's all I need. The hard lines of his face softened and he crossed the room to pull her into a hug. It feels like I just got you and now I'm losing you all over again. She heard him mumble into her hair. He pulled back and looked down at her solemnly. His eyes, so similar to the color hers had once been, were misted with tears. Will I ever see you again? Bella jerked back in shock. Why wouldn't you? Your old dad's not as oblivious as you'd like to think he is. I knew early on that Jasper, Emmett, and Rose were different, but I never questioned it because they made you so happy. He inhaled deeply. And now, you're like them, aren't you? She nodded slowly. She had asked Jasper a few weeks later what that emotion was. Her dad had been feeling after he hugged her. Loss, he had replied, a frown of confusion on his face. Dad, Bella cried softly, feeling venom gather in her eyes. She buried her face into the smooth fabric of his jacket. I'm so sorry, she whispered, though she was unsure exactly what she was apologizing for. It's all right, kiddo. Just call or write me from time to time. Let me know you're all right. And if you can, come and see me. Or better yet, I'll come see you. Deal, she promised. He placed a small kiss on her forehead. You make sure that boy takes care of you. I will, Dad, she sniffled before grinning slyly. And you make sure to ask Iris to marry you. He chuckled. We'll see. The moment was interrupted by a soft knock on the door before it was partially cracked open. Everything's ready, came Rosie's slightly muffled voice. Come on, he said, offering her his arm. Let's get you to that boy before he thinks you ran off on him. Bella laughed waterily and looped her arms through his. As they stepped out onto the back porch and made their way towards the stairs that led into the backyard, a slightly retooled and softer version of the wedding march drifted up to Bella's ears. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see Peter sitting just off to the side of the few guests, grinning widely as he strummed his guitar. She spared Peter only a short glance before her eyes were drawn to the sight of Jasper, standing tall and proud, in a perfect replica of a suit straight out of his era, underneath the wedding arch, and looking at her as if she was the only woman in the whole world. She felt him reach out to her through the bond and was almost brought to her knees by the amount of love he directed towards her. She did her best to reflect it back, and when the smile on his face grew, she knew she had succeeded. Her attention was drawn away when Charlie suddenly whispered, "What's that?" She tore her eyes away from Jasper and followed her gaze towards where he was motioning. She gasped softly when she finally saw it. On the top step, glowing softly in the dim light, was a single sunflower, its yellow petals more vibrant than she had ever seen before. A sunflower, she heard Charlie mutter curiously as she knelt to pick it up. Where did that come from? Aren't they out of season? Man. Bella breathed as she wrapped her pale fingers around the stem. What was that? They were Nan's favorite, Bella explained as she nestled the sunflower into the center of the bouquet and rose to her feet. Oh? Charlie replied, the corner of his lips quirking in amusement. Well, maybe it's her way of saying she approves. Bella looked up at the periwinkle sky and smiled. You know, she said, as she tucked her arm back into her father's elbow and began walking towards her future. I think you might be right. The end.